Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
Have you ever really wondered how regular people, not the tech geniuses or the Wall Street types, actually become millionaires from scratch? Well, today we're digging into a book that found out the real secrets by just asking them. And let me tell you, the answers are probably not what you're thinking. Everything we're talking about today comes from Secrets of Self-Made Millionaires by Matthew R. Kratter. And look, this is not your typical finance book. It's not about trust fund kids or overnight tech billionaires. It's about the unexpected paths of people like plumbers, ski instructors, and even pet cremators who built their fortunes all on their own. So, what is the real secret to building that kind of wealth? Is it some lucky stock pick? A groundbreaking invention? Or is it something completely different that most of us are just overlooking every single day?
Yeah, the answer isn't a straight line, not even close. As we're about to see, the real paths to wealth are often kind of messy, totally unconventional, and sometimes just plain weird. But they all get to the same destination. So, let's jump into the first secret.
Okay, our first secret is a total game changer. Find your unsexy niche. Seriously, while everyone else is chasing the next glamorous tech startup, the real money is often hiding in plain sight, in those boring businesses that nobody really wants to talk about.
So get this, there's a plumber in the book. He made a fantastic living, charging about $150 an hour. But his true wealth didn't come from fixing toilets. It came from his love of beer. He was a huge Sam Adams fan, so when they went public, he just started buying shares. And he kept buying them, turning his after-work hobby into a multi-million-dollar portfolio.
Or how about this one, a pet cremator? It's not a business you bring up at a dinner party, right? But the book makes a great point. When a beloved pet passes away, the owners are emotional. They're not looking for a bargain. And that creates a business with surprisingly high profit margins on everything, from the service itself to the urns, all by serving a really powerful emotional need. Then you've got this handyman who became the off-the-grid millionaire. Instead of building a mansion on some cheap remote land he bought, he created a whole community of tiny, affordable rentals, like a converted school bus, a yurt, a couple of small cabins. He's basically providing a solution for people who want to escape crazy high rent, and because of it, he lives a totally debt-free, cash-based life. So, what do toilets, pet funerals, and off-grid living all have in common? It's pretty simple. They all operate in these little niches with really high profit margins, almost no competition, because nobody thinks they're cool, and they solve a real, often desperate problem for a very specific group of people. That, right there, is the niche advantage. Okay, so finding a profitable niche is step one. But how do you actually grow that money? Well, that brings us to our second secret. You have to master an investing style that works for you. And as we're about to see, there is absolutely no single right way to do it. What's so fascinating here is that we see two completely opposite but equally successful strategies. On one hand, you have the plumber, who took this really concentrated risk by going all in on one single stock he knew inside and out. Then on the other hand, you have this couple who retired at 35 by doing the exact opposite. They just automated all their savings and diversified everything into the S&P 500. One path is super focused, the other is broad and steady. The lesson? They can both work. And this whole idea of investing in what you know, it can lead to some truly incredible results. Take the ski instructor who inherited $30,000. He didn't know much about the stock market, so he just put 10 grand into a company he used all the time, Netflix. That one simple decision grew 116 times over, basically making him a millionaire completely by accident. But what if the secret to wealth isn't about business or investing at all? Our third secret reveals a path that starts not with changing your portfolio, but with changing yourself, by literally hacking your own mind and body. This was the entire philosophy of a guy they call the biohacker. He completely transformed himself from a bored office worker into a successful Silicon Valley investor, all based on this one simple idea. If you can change your biochemistry, you can change your life. He was convinced that by optimizing his internal state, he could unlock a whole new level of success in the outside world. But his journey didn't start with crazy experiments. He believed that before you can become superhuman, you have to become fully human first. So he mastered the absolute fundamentals, getting at least 8 hours of quality sleep, cutting out sugar to optimize his nutrition, and making exercise an absolute non-negotiable part of his day. And then, things get even more radical.
One computer science grad became a millionaire trader with a very unique belief that we are all living inside a software simulation. He treated reality like a program that he could manipulate. Every single morning, he would write down his goal: I will make $10 million in the next 2 years, 30 times. And he believes that this intense focus literally programmed the simulation to give him what he wanted, which it did right during the dot-com boom.
So we've seen unsexy businesses. We've seen radically different investment strategies, biohacking, and even reality programming. I mean, these paths could not be more different from each other. So what is the one unifying secret that connects them all?
No, really, think about it. What single thread connects the plumber who loved beer, the biohacker who optimized his sleep, and the couple who retired in their 30s? There is one common denominator, and honestly, it's the most important secret of them all.
There it is. The one thing they all had in common wasn't a degree or a specific skill, but a mindset. It's a relentless desire to learn. They were constantly acquiring new knowledge, whether that was about beer companies or human biology or investment strategies. Their wealth wasn't an accident. It was a direct result of their commitment to just keep on learning. Their journeys prove there is no single roadmap to wealth, but every single one of their paths started in the exact same place, with the decision to learn something new. So the real question for you isn't which path to follow, it's what will you decide to learn today?
All right, let's jump right in. We're tackling a huge question today. How do you actually become a self-made millionaire? And you know what? The answer might not be what you're expecting. It all starts with a pretty simple concept.
Now, I'm sure you've heard this a million times, right? But let's really think about it for a second. This isn't just some feel-good quote you see on social media. According to the source material we're looking at, this is the bedrock principle. If you hang out with negative people, that's going to drag you down. But if you hang out with millionaires, well, your chances of becoming one suddenly get a whole lot better.
And look, this isn't magic or some weird secret. It's just the law of averages. We humans are wired to be influenced by the people around us. Their habits, their way of thinking, their strategies, it all just kind of rubs off on you. So the big takeaway is, if you want success, you've got to surround yourself with success. But how on earth do you do that?
To really understand this, let's look at the author's own life. The guy had some serious access. I mean, he went to the same high school as Bill Gates. Then he's off to Stanford, where he meets Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal. Gets his PhD from Berkeley, and then Thiel hires him to work at his massive hedge fund. He was literally swimming in a sea of success. But then, after laying out this absolutely incredible resume, he says something that just stops you in your tracks. He drops this bombshell. He says he is not a self-made millionaire. I mean, that's the complete opposite of what you'd expect to hear, right? So, what's he talking about?
Well, it turns out he gives all the credit to his support system, his family, his friends, his teachers, his mentors. His whole point is that nobody, and I mean nobody, really achieves success all by themselves in a vacuum. He had a ton of help, which just goes to show you that this whole self-made idea, it's a lot more complicated than it sounds.
Okay, so his story is a perfect example of how powerful being around the right people can be. But it also shines a big bright light on the main problem for most of us. Even the author admits he had a huge head start. So if you don't have that golden ticket to a fancy school or a built-in network, how do you even begin? And this is what the author calls the millionaire's catch-22. It's that classic, super frustrating paradox, right? You need to be in the club to get ahead, but you can't get into the club unless you're already ahead. It's a total chicken and egg situation that can feel pretty hopeless. But here's the breakthrough. Here's the big idea. If the old doors are locked, you don't just stand there knocking forever. You find a new door. The solution is all about finding a new kind of access. Let's just break this down. On the left, you've got the old way, the one we all hear about. Go to the best schools, get invited to the right parties, get hired by an insider. For most of us, that's just not going to happen. But look at the right side, the new way. You can hang out with these people by reading their stories. You can absorb their exact strategies. You can literally adopt their philosophies. And that path, that's open to anybody.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, who are these new mentors then? If we're not talking about the famous celebrity billionaires, who exactly are we supposed to be learning from?
Well, here they are. These new mentors are ordinary people. People who became millionaires from scratch. They didn't inherit a dime. They earned every single penny. And they didn't just work hard, they worked smart. A huge thing they all have in common? They are all obsessed with reading. They never stopped learning. These are people you can actually relate to.
And that is the key to this new door we were talking about. By reading, it could be biographies, articles, interviews, whatever, you get a front row seat to how they think and operate. You can learn their daily routines, their business secrets, their investment ideas, all without needing an invitation to some exclusive club.
So, what does this actually look like for you? Well, here's the roadmap, and it's surprisingly simple. Step 1, just start reading their stories. Step 2, really absorb what they did, their routines and strategies. Step 3, let their journey get you fired up. And then step 4, the most important one, take all that and start building your own path.
And this is about so much more than just financial tricks. When you really immerse yourself in these stories, your whole perspective starts to shift. You start to understand the mindset behind building wealth, and that can totally change how you look at your life, your career, and your money.
And really, if you walk away with just one thing, it should be this. These were regular people. Their stories are living proof. If they could figure it out, starting from nothing, then that potential is inside you too.
So, look, we've laid it all out. We've seen the problem, that catch-22, and we found a solution that is available to literally everyone. The roadmap is clear, the proof is there. It's not a question of if it's possible anymore. The only real question left is, are you going to start?
Today, we're diving into the pretty wild story of one man's radical journey. I'm talking about a transformation from a self-described loser into a biohacking millionaire who has ambitions that stretch across the entire galaxy. Yeah, it's a wild one, so let's just get right into it. So let's just start with the before and after, because it really sets the stage. On the left, you've got this average passive student, basically just wasting time. And on the right, a learning machine, a millionaire investor, and someone whose literal mission is to defeat death. The contrast is, well, it's pretty staggering. And that right there brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. How on earth does a transformation of this magnitude even happen? What's the actual blueprint for something like this? To really understand the after, we have to go all the way back to the before. So let's start with his own pretty unflattering description of his early life. He kind of paints this picture of a life that was just stuck. A solid B student who just took the first boring job that came along and showed basically zero initiative. And looking back on it, he doesn't pull any punches. He straight up calls that version of himself a loser. He doesn't even see it as just a change. He describes it as a complete reinvention, a new organism a galaxy away. That's the scale of transformation he feels he's gone through.
So what was the spark? Every origin story has one. For him, it wasn't some lab accident or a cosmic ray. Nope, it was a trip to the movie theater.
The catalyst was the 2011 movie Limitless. You've probably seen it. It's about a writer who takes this fictional smart drug, and it unlocks his brain's full potential. He said he literally walked out of that theater a different person, with this brand new purpose, to find out if life could actually be lived at that level.
So his first attempt, yeah, it was a little clumsy. He couldn't find the fictional drug from the movie, obviously, but he did find Adderall. He got a prescription, went home, and ended up reading his old high school chemistry textbook for 5 hours straight, and was completely fascinated by it. That was the high. But then came the crash, and it was bad. Panic attacks, zero sleep. He realized pretty quickly this was not the answer.
But even though that experiment was a total bust, it led him to what he calls the single most important lesson of his life. If you can change your biochemistry, you can change your life. That idea became the foundation for everything he did next.
Before he could even think about becoming superhuman, he realized he had to start by just becoming a properly functioning human. So he got laser-focused on mastering 3 fundamental pillars of health. Pillar 1 was sleep, which he calls one of his superpowers, and his routine is incredibly strict. We're talking a pitch-black, 65-degree room, no screens for hours before bed, and a rigid 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. schedule. For him, this wasn't a luxury. He treated sleep like a critical performance tool, the absolute foundation for everything else.
Okay, next pillar, diet. This was inspired by what he calls ancestral health. So that meant cutting out all sugar, all gluten, and all those common seed oils. The goal was to have constant mental clarity, fueling his body with organic veggies and grass-fed meats, and, get this, a radical commitment to eating only 1 meal a day. And the third pillar, exercise, that completed the foundation. His approach here was pretty straightforward, but very purposeful. Regular weightlifting focused on big muscle groups for strength, mixed with hikes and long jogs for endurance. With these three pillars finally locked in, he felt he was back to a human baseline. But see, baseline was never the goal. The goal was superhuman. So with that solid foundation in place, he started experimenting with let's call it a controversial toolkit to engineer a higher state of being. His toolkit is pretty diverse. He uses plant medicines like coffee and cannabis to get into a flow state. He takes prescription drugs like metformin for anti-aging, and then supplements like maca root and lion's mane. He also mentions there are other undisclosed prescription drugs that he believes are actively increasing his intelligence and his lifespan. He even has a specific name for one of his key combos, the hippie speedball. It's this precise ritual, a quick 20-minute jog, then a cup of coffee, and a few hits of a very specific strain of cannabis. He claims this is the perfect recipe to trick his brain into a state of deep, sustained focus, letting him work for hours without any distraction. And this is where you really start to see the true scale of his ambition. It's not just about being more productive or living a few extra years. He's aiming to ride the singularity, that hypothetical point where AI gets so smart it just changes civilization forever. He wants to be on the front lines of that. Which brings us to his ultimate endgame. And it's not just a personal philosophy, it's a pretty provocative theory about the future of our entire species. To explain his worldview, he uses this analogy with the cyclist Lance Armstrong. He argues that in sports, performance-enhancing drugs are against the rules. But in the real world of business and life, he says, there are no rules against biohacking. The competition is completely unlimited. And this leads to the core of his whole theory. He believes we're literally watching an evolutionary split happen in real time. A new superspecies of biohackers, he claims, is breaking away from what he calls regular humans, who are just being left behind. He sees this as an advantage that just compounds over generations. With optimized bodies and minds, this group gets access to the best deals, the best partners, and he predicts they'll eventually have the tech to genetically edit their own kids, creating an even bigger gap with every generation. So what's the final destination for all this optimization? It's not just money or a long life. His actual stated goal is, in 200,000 years, to be the ruler of a great new civilization that covers an entire galaxy. I mean, whether you think that's visionary or just delusional, you can't say it's not ambitious. So, what do we make of this whole journey, from a self-described loser to a would-be galactic emperor? Is this a glimpse into the future of human potential? Or is it maybe a cautionary tale about ambition that's just been left completely unchecked? Well, the answer to that is up to you. All right, get this. We're going to talk about a guy who followed his dad into the trades. Works with his hands, no college degree. He's a plumber. But he's also a self-made multi-millionaire. So how on earth is that even possible? Well, let's dive in and unpack his incredible story. In his own words, his business is about as simple as it gets. We're not talking about a fancy office or a big team to manage. None of that corporate stuff. Nope. It's just him, his skills, and a phone that connects him straight to his customers. I mean, that's the definition of a lean operation, right? And this is the real head scratcher. How does a one-man plumbing shop turn into multi-millionaire status, especially when he's living in one of the most expensive places on the planet? Well, the answer has a twist, and I'm telling you, you're probably not going to see it coming. Okay, so let's start with the most obvious piece of the puzzle here, the plumbing business itself. Because let's be real, plumbing might not sound all that glamorous, but in a place like the Bay Area, oh yeah, it can be incredibly lucrative. The secret sauce here is just sheer simplicity. He only does residential work. So think about it. His overhead is crazy low. All he needs is a phone, a van, and his tools. And get this? He's built such a solid reputation that pretty much all of his business is just word of mouth. It's really a masterclass in how to run an efficient business. So what does a lean model like that actually let him earn? A cool $150 an hour, plus materials, of course. And hey, let's be honest, when your toilet is flooding your bathroom on a Sunday night, you are more than happy to pay that, aren't you? Okay, let's put that hourly rate into perspective for a second. Even just working a pretty modest 30 hours a week, he's pulling in around $18,000 a month before taxes. Wow. I mean, that is some serious income by any standard. And here is where it gets really interesting. Let's do a little comparison. His monthly income, it's pretty much on par with what a software engineer at Google might be making in the exact same area. I mean, sure, he's not getting the stock options, but his raw earning power is right up there with one of the most prestigious tech jobs you can get. Crazy, right? So, okay, a great income. That's one thing. And yeah, he bought his house in the Bay Area way back in the 80s, so you know he's got a ton of home equity. But is that the whole story? Is the secret really just a good job and one smart real estate purchase a long time ago? Yeah, not even close. He's actually super clear about this. He says, yes, his house is a huge part of his net worth, but it is not the main event. The real secret to his incredible wealth lies somewhere else entirely, and it's a place you'd never, ever expect. All right, this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn, because it's not just about a successful career anymore. This is a lesson in some seriously unconventional wealth building. And believe it or not, it all started with his favorite drink. Yep, you heard that right. He says, and it's kind of ironic, that his lifelong beer habit has made him more money than anything else he's ever done. Not unclogging drains, not installing toilets, just a simple, consistent love for one particular brand of beer. So check this out. This timeline lays out the whole incredible journey. It all starts back in 1995. He sees an offer on a six-pack of Sam Adams beer to buy shares in their IPO. He throws down just under $500 and gets 33 shares. Then, the dot-com bubble hits. The stock gets crushed, crushing all the way from $33 down to just $6.50. I mean, can you imagine? Most people would have freaked out and sold, right? But here's the key. He didn't. He never lost faith because he knew the product, he knew the beer was great. So starting in 1998, he just started using profits from his plumbing business to buy more shares, month after month after month. And the result? Well, those same shares he was buying for as low as $6.50, they're now worth over $300 a pop. Just incredible. So what do you even call a strategy like that? I mean, it completely flies in the face of all the conventional wisdom you always hear, right? This wasn't diversification. This was a bold, all-in, concentrated bet on something he knew inside and out. So let's actually break down the philosophy behind how he did it. You know that old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket? Well, he knows it too, but he points to the part of that advice that everybody seems to forget. If you do put all your eggs in one basket, you better watch that basket very, very closely. And that is exactly what he did. Now, this wasn't just some random wild gamble. It's actually a legitimate investment strategy. It's called concentration, and it's famously used by legendary investors like Warren Buffett. The idea is actually pretty simple. Owning hundreds of stocks that you barely know anything about is probably just going to get you average results. But if you know a handful of companies inside and out, well, that's how you can get truly extraordinary returns. When you look at it, his whole process really breaks down into 4 simple steps. Step 1, find a product you actually know and love. For him, that was Sam Adams beer. Step 2, do your homework. He actually read every single annual report. Step 3, invest your profits consistently. He just funneled money from his plumbing business in there every single month. And step 4, and honestly, this is the hardest part for most people. You have to hold on with real conviction, even when the market is going crazy and everything's tanking. So, what are the big takeaways from all this? I mean, his story offers some really profound lessons that go way beyond just dollars and cents. They're really about a practical, down-to-earth approach to your career, your finances, and even life itself. He really boils his advice for the next generation down to a few key things. First, he says, don't be afraid to go into the skilled trades. We have a massive shortage of good craftspeople out there. Second, be realistic about student loans and what you're actually studying in college. Third, invest in what you know and use regularly. Find those companies and products that you genuinely understand. And finally, and this is a big one, he says to find a spouse who shares your values, not just in life, but with money too. You know, after this whole incredible journey, building a fortune from toilets and beer, this is his final piece of wisdom. And it's such a powerful reminder that all that financial success, it's just a tool. It's not the ultimate goal. He says life just flies by, so you have to take the time to appreciate the little moments, because that's where the real wealth is found. So let's talk about the story of a regular guy, a corporate paper pusher, who saw a massive opportunity where everyone else just saw disaster. We're talking about the 2008 financial crisis. He managed to build a multi-million-dollar real estate empire from absolutely nothing, and honestly, it's a masterclass in seeing what other people miss. Let's break down exactly how he did it. I know what you're thinking. That sounds completely impossible, right? How in the world can you get paid to own a house? Especially a house you bought using none of your own money. Well, stick with me, because the math behind this is surprisingly simple, and it's coming right up. All right, so to really get how he pulled this whole thing off, you first have to understand who he was before he became the foreclosure king. And the short answer is, he was a pretty regular, unremarkable guy. He came from a pretty standard background. Grew up in the suburbs, studied a bit of real estate in community college, but then ended up in a super stable but kind of boring job at a health insurance company. And for years, that was fine. But then, right around age 27, he said it was like he just woke up. He looked around his cubicle and just knew. He had to find a way out. He needed an escape plan. And you know where that escape plan came from? The last place you'd expect. A full-blown national disaster. The great financial crisis was, of course, devastating for millions of people. But for him, it created a once-in-a-generation kind of opportunity. What he saw was this incredible, dramatic shift. I mean, just a few years before, house prices were through the roof, just astronomical. But by 2011, the entire market had crashed. The banks had taken back millions of homes in foreclosure, and now they were desperate to get them off their books, basically selling them for pennies on the dollar. And while he was just browsing on Redfin one day, he had this key insight. This was the light bulb moment. He wasn't just looking for any cheap foreclosure. He got super specific. He started looking for foreclosures that already had tenants living in them. Think about that. These weren't just empty houses. They were already active income-generating assets from day one. Okay, so here's the catch. There's always a catch, right? To get these rock-bottom prices, you couldn't just go get a mortgage. The banks wanted all cash, and they wanted it now. He only had about 50 grand saved up, which wasn't nearly enough. So how did he buy his first $89,000 house, let alone an entire portfolio of 20? And this, right here, is where the real genius of the plan comes in. He figured out a way to buy these houses using 100% other people's money. Now, to get how his plan worked, you only need to understand this one super simple concept: gross rental yield. All it is the total rent you collect in a year divided by how much you paid for the house. That's it. At the time, if you had money in a savings account, you're getting a pathetic 1% return. But these foreclosure deals, their rental yields were incredible, often over 13%. And that huge gap between 1% and 13%, that was his opportunity. So here's exactly what he did, step by step. First, he went to his friends and coworkers, the ones complaining about that lousy 1% they were earning on their savings. Second, he made them a much, much better offer, a guaranteed, fixed 5% return per year. For them, it was a no-brainer. Third, he pooled their money together to buy the houses with all cash. And finally, the rent money from the tenants would pay for absolutely everything: the 5% interest back to his friends, the property taxes, insurance, repairs, and whatever was left over at the end of the year, that was all his. Okay, so theory is great, but let's get into the actual numbers from his very first deal. This is where you can really see the magic happen. His very first house was a 3-bedroom home, and he bought it for $89,000. All cash. And remember, not a single penny of it was his. And here's the key. It already had a family living there, paying $1,000 a month in rent. So from day one, that little house was generating $12,000 a year in income. So that 12 grand in annual rent, where did it all go? Well, it covered everything. First, it paid his lenders, his friends, their 5% interest. Then it covered property taxes and insurance. He even hired a property manager and set aside money for future repairs. And after all of that was paid for, there was still a nice chunk of cash left over. Here it is, all laid out. After every single possible expense was paid, he was left with $3,370 in pure profit every year. And that brings us right back to that quote from the beginning. He was literally being paid to own an asset that he bought entirely with other people's money. It's just incredible. Okay, so he proved the formula could work once, but that was just the beginning. Now that he had a system, a repeatable formula, it was time to scale up and really become the king of foreclosures.
And that's exactly what he did. He just rinsed and repeated this strategy again and again and again until he had 20 houses. He borrowed from friends, from family, even from professional hard money lenders who charged a higher interest rate. His goal wasn't even to get rich off the monthly rent. He just wanted the whole portfolio to pay for itself, to be cash flow neutral. That way, he could hold on to the properties for free and just wait.
And wait he did. And this, what he called the real magic, is where patience paid off big time. That very first house he bought for $89,000, just 5 years later, the housing market started to roar back. He sold it for $289,000. That's a pure profit of $200,000 on a house he never put a dime into. Now, imagine doing that across your entire 20-house portfolio by the time he sold the last house at the end of 2017 and paid back every single lender. His total net profit was over $2 million. And with that, he finally cashed in his escape plan. He walked out of that cubicle for good. Today, he's a full-time dad, husband, and spends a whole lot of time playing golf, just enjoying the freedom that he built for himself, piece by piece, during the worst financial crisis of our time. He ends his story with this really powerful thought. He says he's just waiting for the next housing collapse. Only this time, he says, he has both the cash and the know-how to do it even bigger. It's a provocative question, and it really makes you think. When the next crisis eventually hits, are we going to see it as a disaster, or are we going to see it as an opportunity?
All right, let's dive into a story that is just wild. It honestly sounds like it's pulled straight from a sci-fi movie. We're talking about a trader who didn't just play the market. He was convinced he could actually rewrite the code of reality itself to make a fortune.
And this is the result. $10 million. And that's after taxes. I mean, it's a completely life-changing amount of money. But believe me, how he says he did it is even crazier.
So, the big question, right? How on earth do you turn 10 grand into that in just 3 years? The answer isn't some complex trading algorithm or secret insider information. Nope. It's a story about mushrooms, cheat codes, and questioning the very fabric of our existence. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to understand how this happened, we've got to rewind. And our story doesn't start on Wall Street. No, it starts in a Stanford dorm room where a really radical idea started to form. So picture this. You've got this super smart, maybe a little bit cocky computer science major at Stanford. This trader, who by the way is still anonymous, was reading Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, and he decided to, well, experiment a little with psilocybin. You know, magic mushrooms. All in the name of exploring his own consciousness.
And look, for this guy, this wasn't just some wild college trip. No way. It was a complete fundamental revelation. He literally felt like his mind was authoring reality in real time, like he could change colors and sounds just by thinking about them. He walked away from that experience totally convinced that our world isn't some fixed, solid thing. He believed it's something we shape, moment to moment, with our own minds.
So this epiphany, it led him to this worldview that honestly sounds completely bizarre, but, for a computer science guy, it actually made a weird kind of sense.
He basically became a true believer in the simulation hypothesis, the idea that all of this, our reality, you, me, everything, is just an incredibly advanced computer-generated simulation, that we're essentially all just characters running around in a cosmic video game. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. He didn't just feel this was true, he tried to reason it out with logic and physics. First, there's the odds game. He argued that if any civilization ever creates a realistic simulation, they'll probably create tons of them. So statistically, it's way more likely we're in one of the countless simulations than the one, single, base reality. Then he points to physics. The universe has these hard limits, right? Like the speed of light. It's like a built-in boundary we can never cross. And then there's quantum mechanics, where particles act weirdly when we try to observe them, almost like the program is glitching because we're trying to look too closely at the code.
Okay, so let's follow this logic for a second. If you are 100% convinced that you're living inside a giant video game, what's the very next thing you're going to do? Exactly. You're going to start looking for the cheat codes.
And the cheat code he came up with, it's almost ridiculously simple. You take a clean sheet of paper, you write down exactly what you want, and it has to be specific. Then you write it out by hand, 30 times. And you do this every single morning. No exceptions, like you're typing a command directly into the universe's terminal.
But he didn't go for the 10 million bucks right away. Smart, right? He decided to test it on something smaller, but, to him, almost as impossible. He wanted to date this one specific Stanford cheerleader who he thought was completely and totally out of his league. And, well, what do you know? It worked. His friends were absolutely floored. So now he's got this proof of concept, right? He's thinking, okay, if this cheat code worked for a relationship, why wouldn't it work for something else? Why not for money? I mean, why not for a boatload of money?
And that's exactly what he did. He took this bizarre, mushroom-inspired philosophy and pointed it directly at the biggest game on the planet, the stock market. So he starts his new ritual. Every single morning he's writing, "I will make $10 million 30 times over." He starts with just 10 grand in 1997, which, was perfect timing, right at the start of the dot-com bubble. 3 years later, by 2000, he's out. And he's got over $10 million in the bank, after taxes. He basically told the simulation what he wanted, and it delivered.
This right here is the absolute key to the whole thing, his mindset. He wasn't trading like everyone else, worried about every little dip. He was operating with this supreme, unshakable confidence because, in his mind, the world wasn't even real. He could literally program it to give him money. For him, trading was, well, easy.
And you can really see the difference in how he operated versus his buddies. I mean, his computer science friends were buried in complex fundamental analysis, arguing over which tech company was better. They famously thought Amazon was a total joke. He just ignored all of that. To him, it was just a game. He followed super simple rules. If a stock is hitting new highs, buy it. If it starts to drop, sell it. He was just following the price action, playing the game.
Okay, let's just stop for a second. The elephant in the room, right? Is this guy a genius who actually hacked reality, or was he just the luckiest dude on the planet who was in the right place at the right time?
I mean, the skeptic's argument is obvious. Dude was in Silicon Valley during the biggest tech bubble in history. A monkey throwing darts at a stock list could have made money. But his comeback is pretty wild. He says, "Of course it looks like luck. The simulation is programmed to hide itself. Any programming he does is designed to look like a coincidence to everyone else, so we don't figure out the game."
So naturally, someone finally just asked him straight up, "Hey, is it possible you're just, mentally ill from your past drug use?" And his answer is just amazing. He says, yes, it is certainly possible, but here's the thing. There's really no way to tell the difference, is there? I mean, wow, what a thought.
And that's really where this whole story leaves you. Look, the trader himself says he doesn't really care if you believe him or not. He just says, hey, try it. Write down what you want 30 times a day, every day, see what happens. It's such a crazy story of money and belief, and it really makes you wonder, if you really could program the universe to give you just one thing, what would you ask for?
For most of us, retiring at 65 feels like a long shot, right? Well, what if I told you about a couple who just hung it all up at 35? And no, they didn't win the lottery, they didn't build some unicorn startup, they just had a plan. So let's dive into how they pulled off what seems totally impossible.
Yep, there it is, straight from the source. They literally just stopped working, in their mid-30s. I mean, that's before most of us even hit our peak career stride. So the only question that really matters right now is how in the world did they do it?
So let's get into it. How did they do it? Look, this wasn't about a lucky break or some genius stock pick. Their whole journey kicked off the second they got their college diplomas, with a really simple but super disciplined plan.
Okay, so forget all the complicated financial jargon, the risky ventures, none of that. Their entire success story really just boils down to three things: good planning, serious discipline, and, this is the key, automation. See, it was all about building a system, a machine that they couldn't really break. And that whole system, it was built on one incredibly powerful rule.
And here it is. This is the absolute core of their entire financial engine. A single powerful rule that they came up with when they were just 22 years old, and it basically dictated the next 13 years of their lives. Pretty wild, right? 50%. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. They saved half of every single paycheck. We're not talking 10% or even the recommended 20% that you always hear about. We're talking half. So while all their friends were getting into that lifestyle creep, upgrading their cars and apartments with every raise, these two just held the line.
But, okay, how do you save half your income and not feel totally miserable every single day? The answer? Ruthless automation. So first things first, they grabbed all the free money on the table. That meant maxing out their 401ks to get every last dollar of their employer's match. Smart. Then, and this is the really genius part, they set up an automatic transfer. The second their paycheck hit their bank account, bam, half of it was immediately swept into a totally separate investment account. They never even saw it. Which meant, for step 3, it was simple. They just had to live on whatever was left over.
You've probably heard this a million times, right? Pay yourself first. But they actually did it. For them, savings wasn't just, what was left over at the end of the month. Nope. It was the very first and most important bill they paid every single time. And by putting it on autopilot, they took willpower completely out of the equation. The system did all the heavy lifting for them.
All right, so the saving is automated. That's great. But you still got to live on just half an income. I mean, how is that even possible for most people? Well, it meant they had to make some huge, really deliberate choices about their lifestyle.
So they went straight for the 2 biggest budget killers for pretty much everyone: housing and transportation. Instead of getting a big, spacious place, they chose a tiny apartment. That meant lower rent and way less stuff to buy to furnish it. And get this, by living close enough to bike to work, they completely eliminated the need for a car. Think about that. No car payments, no insurance, no gas, no repairs. All of it, just gone.
And it wasn't just the big stuff. The little things really added up too. So forget the brand new iPhone every year. They were rocking dollar store flip phones, no cable TV subscription. Buying lunch out every day? Nope. They cooked big meals over the weekend to last the week. And a pricey gym membership? Nah. They just used the free gym in their apartment building. Every single dollar had a purpose.
I mean, the contrast here is just stark. When you picture their weekends versus their friends' weekends, their friends were out spending, say, $75 on cocktails every Friday and Saturday night. Meanwhile, their idea of a perfect weekend? Just relaxing at home with a good book. And look, for them, this wasn't about depriving themselves. It was a very conscious choice. They were opting out of these expensive social habits to, quite literally, buy back their own time.
Okay, so they mastered saving. They mastered frugal living. But where did all that saved money actually go? Well, that brings us to the third and final piece of their plan, putting that money to work for them, again, completely on autopilot.
Their investment of choice was something called SPY. Now, if you're not familiar with it, the concept is actually incredibly simple. It's an ETF, an exchange-traded fund, that lets you buy a tiny little piece of the 500 biggest companies in the US, all at once. So really, it's just a simple way to bet on the growth of the entire American economy as a whole.
And here's what might be the most radical part of this whole thing. Their investment strategy was, well, it was boring. There was no stock picking, no trying to time the market. Every single month, that automated savings transfer just bought more SPY. They said they didn't even check their account. They just bought, and they held, and they let the magic of compound interest do its thing for 13 straight years. So, okay, after 13 years of this unwavering discipline, we get to the payoff. What did all that sacrifice actually get them? What does your life even look like when you're totally free at 35?
And this, of course, brings us to the big question, the one everybody's thinking. All those years of saying no to the new phones, no to the expensive nights out, no to the bigger apartment, was it worth it? Did they ever feel like they were just missing out on the best years of their lives?
And their answer is, well, it's pretty powerful. They admit, yeah, sure, sometimes they wanted an iPhone. But what they ultimately realized is that the endless chase for more stuff is actually a pretty empty pursuit. For them, real wealth wasn't about what you could buy. It was about having the freedom to invest in the things that truly matter, like meaningful relationships with family and friends.
So what did that freedom actually get them in the end? Well, they retired, they welcomed a baby boy into the world, they bought a modest house out in the country, not to impress anybody, but just to live a simpler life. Growing their own vegetables, raising chickens. And the ironic part, their cost of living is now lower than it has ever been.
So, what's next for them? Well, for now, it's all about focusing on raising their son. But once he's in school, the whole world is basically theirs to explore. New Zealand, Bali, the Great Barrier Reef, it's all on the table now. See, they didn't just buy financial freedom. They bought themselves a lifetime of choices.
When you really think about it, this couple completely redefined what it means to be rich. They made a trade, right? 13 years of really disciplined, intentional living in exchange for an entire lifetime of freedom.
And it kind of forces all of us to ask ourselves that same question. What are we trading our time for? And what does a rich life truly mean to you?
All right, what if I told you that one of the most brilliant wealth-building strategies right in the heart of Silicon Valley had absolutely nothing to do with stocks or startups? Today, we're going to dive into the story of a handyman from the Bay Area who built a $1 million life by going completely off the grid.
Yeah, it all boils down to this one simple, almost kind of crazy question. How do you take a $3,000 school bus and turn it into a fortune? I mean, really, that's the heart of the story we're getting into right now.
All right, Section 1, a different kind of dream, from handyman to homesteader. So, you gotta ask, where did a journey this unique even begin? Because, let me tell you, this was not some get-rich-quick scheme. Nope, this was a dream that started years and years before.
So the guy at the center of our story, he wasn't exactly a traditional student. He actually became a handyman right after high school. But his real education, that came from books. He just got completely obsessed with the idea of off-grid living, and he was especially inspired by Henry David Thoreau's whole vision of a self-sufficient life out in the woods. And that idea, well, it pretty much became his North Star.
And you know what? This dream took some serious patience. I mean, this did not happen overnight. We're talking 15 years, a decade and a half, that he worked as a handyman, just meticulously saving every single dollar he could. He had one goal, just one, unwavering goal: buy a piece of land and start his new life.
Okay, Section 2, Building the Foundation. Subtitle, 20 Acres and a Goat. So after those 15 long years of saving, the dream, it finally became real. He found his own little piece of paradise, and the foundation for this whole new life was officially laid.
And wow, his timing was just impeccable. He bought his land back in 2001, which was right after the dot-com bubble burst and 9/11 had slowed the market way down. He found this amazing 20-acre spot tucked away in the hills south of San Jose. And get this, it came with a well and a small cabin already on it. He managed to negotiate the price all the way down to under $30,000. Just an absolutely incredible deal.
And the second his old apartment lease was up, he went all in. No hesitation. He moved into that cabin, immediately planted a vegetable garden, got himself some chickens and a goat, and threw up some solar panels for electricity. And just like that, with those few steps, his biggest expenses, rent, food, utilities, they were basically gone, wiped out.
Moving on to Section 3, the school bus business. Subtitle, Solving Silicon Valley's Rent Problem. Okay, so with his own costs down to practically zero, he spotted a massive opportunity. He looked at the single biggest financial headache for literally everyone else in the Bay Area, housing, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to turn that problem into my paycheck.
And this set up such a powerful contrast, right? On one side, you have the typical Silicon Valley life, a tiny, ridiculously expensive apartment. Then on the other side, you have his alternative, a totally unique, affordable living space completely surrounded by nature. He made a bet, a big one, that there were plenty of people who would jump at that second option.
I mean, look, the numbers here really tell the whole story. A studio apartment in San Jose, you're easily looking at over $2,000 a month. What did he offer his converted school bus for? Just $500. So for, young tech workers trying to scrape together a down payment, this was just an irresistible deal, a complete no-brainer. So it all started with that one single $3,000 school bus. But here's the key. As that rent money started rolling in, cash, he didn't go out and spend it. He reinvested every single penny. He bought a yurt. Then he got some used travel trailers. Then a few tiny houses. He just gradually built this little empire of low-cost, off-grid rentals, all right there on his own land.
Section 4, Living an All-Cash Lifestyle. Subtitle, The Millionaire Method. So the big question is, how did this little rental business actually turn him into a millionaire? Well, let's break down his incredibly simple but really, really effective all-cash method.
So his whole method, it really just boils down to 4 simple steps. Step 1, eliminate your own personal living costs. Get them as close to zero as you can. Step 2, go out and acquire low-cost housing assets. An old bus, a used trailer. Step 3, rent those out in a super expensive market. And finally, Step 4, which is the absolute cornerstone of his philosophy, operate on a cash-only basis. And what that means is that he was able to quit his handyman job and live entirely off the cash his tenants paid him.
A big part of his motivation here was this deep desire to just disconnect from the traditional financial system. He was really frustrated with taxes and how he felt the government was spending his money.
And his break from the system is almost total. I mean, he keeps just one checking account, and it's for one specific purpose: to pay the credit card he uses for only two things: his Verizon phone bill and buying books on Amazon. That's it. That's his entire connection to the banking world.
Now this, of course, brings up the big elephant in the room. The question that I'm sure is on your mind. Aren't you afraid about getting caught by the IRS? I mean, operating an all-cash business and not paying taxes, that comes with some pretty obvious and pretty big risks.
So what's his answer to that? Well, according to the source material, he says he's just moved past the fear. His perspective is that he's basically self-insured against that risk. He's saved up so much cash that if the IRS ever does come knocking, he figures he can just pay whatever back taxes and penalties they throw at him, and he can afford to hire the best tax attorneys to handle it all. It's a calculated risk, and it's one he's decided he's comfortable taking.
All right, our final section, number 5, the off-grid millionaire's philosophy. Subtitle: Wealth, Freedom, and Throw. Because you see, this isn't just about a clever financial strategy. It's a whole philosophy. To really get why he makes these choices, you have to look at the vision of life that's driving him.
And his own words here just capture it perfectly. He says, "I would suffocate if I had to move back into the city." See, for him, this isn't just a money-making plan. It's a fundamental need. That freedom of living off the grid, breathing fresh air, being able to actually see the stars, that's something he feels he literally cannot live without.
Now, he does admit there's a bit of a moral conflict for him about not paying taxes. And his way of dealing with that, of reconciling it, is to donate a lot of his cash directly to local homeless shelters. In his mind, this lets him make a much more direct, more personal impact on his community. And really, it all comes back to his original inspiration, Thoreau. He says there are two quotes that have pretty much been his guideposts all these years. The first one is, "Go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you have imagined." And, I mean, you can't argue that he didn't do exactly that. And this second quote, man, it just perfectly sums up his entire worldview. All good things are wild and free. For this guy, the best things in life, they aren't found in a bank account or in some crowded city. They're out in nature, living a life of real, true independence. And all of this brings us to one final, really essential question. This whole story just completely challenges our normal definition of success, right? It really makes you stop and wonder, what does it actually mean to be wealthy? Is it about the number you see in your bank account, or is it about the freedom to live your life completely and totally on your own terms?
Have you ever dreamed of a business that just prints money? I mean, a simple, low-stress operation that brings in incredible profits. Well, today, we're going to dive into the story of a self-made millionaire who found exactly that in probably the last place you'd ever think to look. So it all kicks off with this one really powerful idea. This is a direct quote from the anonymous millionaire whose story we're following. He wasn't looking to build the next big tech startup or get famous. He was on a very specific hunt for a business that would, in his own words, simply drown him in cash. And that's the big question, isn't it? When you strip away all the hype and the fancy business school jargon, what are the actual mechanics of a true cash flow machine? Well, the answer he found is, well, it's both really surprising and honestly kind of brilliant. All right, so let's meet the guy at the center of this story. He's from a mid-sized city in the Midwest. After college, he did what a lot of people do. He got a job as a real estate agent. And look, a lot of people make great money doing that. But for him, it was a nightmare, just a source of constant stress, and he was desperate to find a way out. And it wasn't even about the money, you know? It was the lifestyle. He absolutely hated those frantic calls at all hours of the night, having to basically absorb all the stress of his clients. And that feeling, that dissatisfaction, is what kicked off this years-long research project to find the absolute perfect business for him. See, he wasn't just looking for any old business. He had this super clear checklist. He knew exactly what he wanted to avoid, things that needed huge investments, tons of inventory, and would just cause him more stress. And on the flip side, he knew precisely what he was looking for, a simple, low-cost operation that would just spit out cash day in and day out. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. His search led him down this fascinating rabbit hole. He started looking at industries where the normal rules of economics just don't really apply. Where competition doesn't automatically drive prices down. These are industries driven by something way more powerful than logic. They're driven by emotion. He had this big light bulb moment. He realized that in certain areas like weddings or funerals, people spend with their hearts, not their heads. Right? When emotions are running high, people aren't really thinking about the price tag, and that creates these enormous markups. He just had to find a niche that tapped into that exact same dynamic. And that was it. That was the answer. Pet cremation. I know it sounds a little strange, maybe even morbid at first, but when you start to look at the economics behind it, you really start to see the genius. So you're probably thinking, why on earth pet cremation? Well, look at how perfectly it fits his criteria. First, the margins are huge. The startup costs, incredibly low. You basically just need a small storefront and a special oven. And it operates in that emotional space we talked about where markups are massive. Plus, it has what he calls a tailwind. More and more people are treating their pets like actual family members, like their fur babies. The industry is only getting bigger. So how does this actually work? How do you turn something like grief into a business that, drowns you in cash? Let's walk through the customer journey, and you'll see exactly how it all comes together. Let's imagine a family dog, right? We'll call him Fido. He's been part of the family for 15 years. The kids grew up with him, and now he's passed away. The family is, of course, completely heartbroken, and they just want to do right by him. And this is where the business model just clicks. Every single step is an emotional decision, and pretty much every decision is an upsell opportunity. Need to transport the body? That's a premium service charge. Do you want a private cremation so Fido's ashes aren't mixed with other pets? Well, that's another premium charge. The default option for the ashes is a cardboard tube, but who wants that for their beloved pet? So you upgrade to a beautiful urn or a glass keepsake, maybe even add a gold locket or turn the ashes into a diamond. Each choice just adds to the bottom line. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Doesn't this sound a little exploitative? Well, here's his take on it, word for word from the source. I don't. No one has a gun to their head, and it's a completely optional service. It's a very blunt perspective for sure, but it's absolutely central to how he sees his business. Okay, so having a profitable idea is one thing, but you've got to protect it, right? Any great idea will attract competition. Our millionaire knew he didn't just need a cash cow. He needed to build a fortress around it. He uses this term you've probably heard if you follow Warren Buffett, a business moat. And it's exactly what it sounds like. A moat is a competitive advantage that makes it nearly impossible for rivals to attack your business and steal your profits. It's your defense. So how did he build his? Well, it's a few key things, really. First, his city is just the right size. It's big enough to be profitable, but small enough that there's really only room for one major player. He completely dominates the local market. Second, he's the top result on Google and Yelp, so he gets almost all the new customers. He also says his competitors are small and, frankly, not very good. But here's the real kicker. He provides genuinely compassionate, high-quality service. That builds trust, and as a little side effect, it actually leads to even more upsells. So he built the perfect cash flow machine. It's protected, it's profitable, it works. But the story doesn't end there. Maybe the most fascinating part is what he actually does with all that money once the machine is built. What do you do when you're literally drowning in cash? Now, this is really interesting. He doesn't go and try to build a pet cremation empire or reinvest in his own industry. Nope, there's no need. Instead, he takes all that cash his business generates and invests it in the most simple, passive way you can imagine. He buys stock in what he calls Warren Buffett-type companies. These stable blue-chip giants like Coca-Cola, Apple, and of course, Buffett's own Berkshire Hathaway. He just buys and holds, simple as that. And what about his own lifestyle? I mean, with that kind of money, he could live anywhere, buy anything. But he actually chooses to live a pretty simple life in his low-cost Midwest hometown. He says he tried the whole rich guy lifestyle. He had the big boat, the big RV, but then he had a realization. As he puts it, those big possessions started to own him. So what's the big lesson here for the rest of us? Well, his wisdom really boils down to this incredible checklist of questions that anyone thinking about starting a business should ask themselves. Questions like, how will this business do in a recession? Does it constantly need more cash just to keep the lights on? Are you going to have your life savings tied up in a warehouse full of stuff? Can it grow without becoming a massive hiring headache? And maybe the most important one, will this business still even exist in 10 years?
His advice is to think long and hard about these things before you ever get started. And that really is the heart of this whole story. It's a powerful reminder that it's not just about having a cool idea or a passion. It's about deeply understanding the financial engine that's going to power it. It challenges all of us to look past the hype and ask a really simple but incredibly important question. Have you truly thought about the economics of what you're trying to build?
I want to tell you a story that sounds, well, completely made up. It's about a guy who spent his life chasing fresh snow and river rapids, and somehow, along the way, secretly became a millionaire. Seriously. This is a story that might just change how you think about building wealth.
See, this was his whole philosophy on life. For 20 years, he was a ski instructor in the winter and a whitewater rafting guide in the summer. His life was built around passion, not a big paycheck. But trust me, that is not the whole story. It's not even close.
Because while he was living this simple adventure-first lifestyle, this was the value of his brokerage account back in January 2019, $1.25 million. Let that sink in, for a guy who says he's never really made much money.
So, that's the big question, right? How in the world does that happen? It wasn't some high-flying corporate job. It wasn't some complicated trading algorithm. The answer is actually way simpler and honestly a lot more dramatic than you'd think.
His whole journey didn't start with some brilliant financial plan. Nope, it all started with an unexpected windfall.
Let's go all the way back to the summer of 2006. His grandfather passed away, which was of course a really sad time. But it also turned out to be the spark for his entire financial future, kicking off a 13-year journey to that $1 million mark.
He inherited $30,000. Now, what's the first thing you'd think of doing? He thought about buying a new car, but then he figured, my old one works just fine. So instead, he made a choice that changed everything. He decided to invest the money. Okay, now here's the kicker. He admitted he knew next to nothing about the stock market. So with that 30 grand, he basically made a 3-part bet, all based on one single simple piece of advice he'd heard.
And what was that advice? Just this. Invest in what you know. That was it. That was his entire strategy. No digging through financial reports, no listening to talking heads on TV, just a really straightforward idea. Put your money into the companies you actually use and understand in your daily life.
So he opened up a Schwab account, and he split that inheritance 3 ways, right down the middle. $10,000 went into Blockbuster, $10,000 into Vail Resorts, and the last $10,000 went into this little company that mailed you DVDs, a company called Netflix.
And this is the best part. Look at how personal these picks were. He chose Vail because, well, he was a ski bum and it was his favorite mountain. He chose Blockbuster because that's where he rented movies. And he chose Netflix because he was literally a customer getting those red envelopes in the mail. He knew these companies as a user, not as an analyst.
So, how did this super simple 3-stock bet actually turn out? Well, the results were anything but simple. In fact, the outcomes for these 3 companies could not have been more different. It was a wild ride.
You know, at the time, he just figured the movie rental market was big enough for both Blockbuster and Netflix to succeed. He wasn't trying to predict the future of media or anything. He just liked watching movies. He later admitted, quote, "It turns out that I was very, very wrong." And here are those results. Just look at this. His Blockbuster investment, it went to 0, a complete wipeout. Vail Resorts did really well, a 5 times return on his money. But then there was Netflix. It returned 116 times his initial investment. I mean, that is an absolutely life-changing number.
Let's just break that down so it really sinks in. The 10 grand in Blockbuster? Gone. Vanished. The 10 grand in Vail? That turned into a very nice $50,000. But that $10,000 he put into Netflix? That one bet became $1,160,000.
So this is the most important thing to understand. One of his picks was a total disaster. Another one was a solid win. But his entire fortune, everything that makes this story so incredible, was built on the back of one single, massive home run stock pick.
So this brings us to the big question. What on earth can we learn from a story that seems so extreme? I mean, it feels like a lightning in a bottle moment, right?
This is what everybody wants to know. Was he just unbelievably lucky, or was he actually smart? Well, if you ask him, the answer is a little bit of both.
He's the first one to tell you that he was probably more lucky than smart. And yeah, picking a stock that goes up 116 times is definitely lucky. But he also made some really smart choices. First, he chose to invest the money, not spend it. He used a simple strategy that he could actually understand, and this is so important. He had the conviction to hold on through all the crazy ups and downs of the market.
And this right here is his #1 piece of advice. He believes that when you invest in something you truly know and believe in, you build up this psychological strength. It gives you the courage to not panic and sell when things get scary. His conviction came from being a happy customer himself, not from some analyst report he didn't understand.
And that leaves us with one final question to think about. His expertise wasn't finance. It was skiing and watching movies. So think about your own world, your job, your hobbies, your passions. What's the company, the product, or the service that you know better than almost anyone else? What's the Netflix in your life?
Today, we're diving into the incredible story of a top quantitative hedge fund manager. But, this isn't just about money and markets, not at all. It's this really profound story about the mind, about survival, and about the search for a formula for life itself.
So where does this story begin? Not on a trading floor, but in a third-grade classroom, with this just incredibly honest and disarming admission. Right there, that one sentence, it sets the stage for a journey that is deeply personal, long before it ever becomes professional.
And this feeling, this wasn't just some fleeting childhood thought. Nope, it actually became the central, defining struggle of his early life. This constant, escalating search for something he felt he was just fundamentally missing.
And you can really see the progression here, and it's stark. What starts in 3rd grade as this sad realization, well, it morphs into a coping mechanism in high school. I'll just chase success instead of happiness. But that kind of strategy, it's just not sustainable. And by the time he got to college, that internal struggle had spiraled into a full-blown crisis. Yeah, and to say things got much worse is, well, it's a huge understatement. All the pressure, the isolation, that long simmering emotional struggle, it all just came to a head. The situation got to a point that's almost impossible to imagine. And this is where it gets incredibly raw. In his own words, he reveals just how close he came to the edge. This wasn't just some dark thought, it was a plan, and he was just hours away from seeing it through. It's just a terrifying reminder of how serious and how dangerous untreated depression can be. But then, right at his absolute lowest moment, something completely unexpected happened. A single event that would literally alter the entire course of his life. Get this, a random phone call, out of the blue, from a friend he hadn't talked to in years, who was just calling to thank him for something he didn't even remember doing. It was this moment of pure chance, this lifeline that just appeared out of nowhere at the most critical second imaginable.
That one call, it was the catalyst. It was like it broke the spell. He immediately took action, walking straight to the campus mental health center, and he finally asked for the help he so desperately needed. This was it. This was the first real step on the long road to recovery.
So looking back on it all, his message is incredibly powerful and direct. He really stresses that not being able to feel happy isn't some personal failure. A lot of times, it's a problem of brain chemistry that can be fixed. The key takeaway really is to get rid of the shame, to recognize it's not a choice, and to take that crucial first step. Talk to someone, and if you can, a professional.
Okay, so as he's starting to get back on his feet personally, something else starts to click into place professionally. He starts to apply that analytical, mathematical mind of his to a field that absolutely fascinated him, the stock market.
You know that image we all have of a trader, right? The gunslinging, shoot-from-the-hip type from the movies? Yeah, that was not him. Not at all. His approach was the polar opposite. He replaced gut instinct with data. He swapped shooting from the hip for building models and backtesting strategies. For him, the market wasn't some casino, it was a scientific phenomenon that he could systematically understand.
And the way he did it was so methodical. And get this, it was all while he was still in college. He was just devouring academic papers, building his own custom software from scratch, and developing these strategies. He was so convincing that his own professors invested in him, which let him launch his first hedge fund before he even graduated. I mean, that's just incredible.
But launching the fund was really just the beginning. The real challenge was surviving and then thriving for over 2 decades in the constantly changing world of finance.
And oh boy, did he thrive. For 20 years, his fund has returned an annualized 25%. Let that sink in for a second. That is an absolutely world-class track record. It's a massive testament to the power of his quantitative approach.
So how in the world do you maintain that kind of performance? Well, he understood a crucial secret. The market is never static. A strategy that works today might be totally useless tomorrow. So the core of his job wasn't just finding a winning formula, it was constantly researching and evolving to find the next one as the old ones inevitably died out.
Let me give you a concrete example. Back during the really volatile markets of 2008 and 2009, there was this one strategy that was super profitable. Basically, it involved betting against or shorting two opposite funds at the same time. One fund goes up when the market goes up, the other goes up when the market goes down. The goal wasn't to guess the market's direction, but to profit from this little quirk in how these leveraged funds are built that makes them lose value over time. It's a process called decay.
The strategy was pretty genius. You bet against both sides, capture that value decay, and you just rebalance all the time to stay neutral. But then, the secret got out. The strategy was being talked about all over financial blogs, and it just got way too crowded. At the same time, the market calmed down, and that high volatility that fueled the decay, it collapsed. The profitable edge just vanished. And that's the constant battle that every quant trader has to face.
So after spending decades modeling the markets, he kind of started to develop a model for his own life, too. A set of principles for managing his health, his wealth, and that elusive goal from all the way back in his childhood: happiness.
And some of his life hacks are pretty unique. He absolutely swears by things like cold plunges and cryotherapy for an instant mood boost. He also uses specific foods like sardines and dark chocolate. But, maybe the most important hack is the simplest one. Just taking the time every single day to stop and ask yourself, hey, how am I feeling? Now, when it comes to his own wealth, his philosophy is simple and it is powerful. A staggering 95% of his net worth is invested right back into his own hedge fund. Talk about having skin in the game.
And this quote, it just sums it all up perfectly. It's a principle of ultimate conviction. He believes so strongly in his own strategies, in his own process, that he is willing to bet almost everything he has on them. I mean, that is the ultimate alignment of interests.
So when you look at the whole journey, from a third grader who literally didn't know how to be happy to a world-class trader who engineered a life of success and contentment, it's just remarkable. He found his formula for the markets, and more importantly, for himself, which kind of leaves us with one final thought. What's yours?
So today we're going to dive into this really fascinating story about how a total personal health crisis actually became the foundation for $1 million business. It's a wild ride from a stressful tech career and just debilitating pain to finding a pretty unconventional cure and a brand new passion. Let's get into how he completely turned his life around. So how does that even happen? How does a guy's desperate search to just feel better, to get out of pain, somehow unlock a totally new career path and lead to $1 million business? We're going to break down exactly how he pulled it off. To really understand his success later on, we have to go back, way back. Turns out he had that entrepreneurial spark from a very young age, long before he ever thought about business as a serious career. I mean, you can totally see the hustle was there from the get-go. In elementary school, he was buying big bags of Starbursts for like $2 and then selling the individual candies for 10 cents a pop. He was making $5 a bag. Classic stuff. He did the whole lemonade stand thing in the summer too. And by the time he got to college, yeah, he was messing around with websites and SEO, but he was actually making more money playing blackjack and poker. The guy was always looking for an angle. So after college, he does what you're supposed to do, right? He gets a real job in the Bay Area tech scene, and the perks were amazing. We're talking free food, company gyms, even massage therapists. But it all came with a price. The culture there just glorified working insane hours, and with the stress, the traffic, and the crazy high cost of living, even with a great salary, he was just feeling completely burnt out. All right, now this is where the story takes a huge turn. While he's trying to manage this high-pressure career, his health just starts to fall apart, and it sends him down this rabbit hole of doctors and treatments that, well, they just weren't helping. And look, it wasn't just one thing. It was like this domino effect of health problems. It started with pain in his neck and lower back. Then came the asthma and constant sinus infections. He eventually gets diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, which explained why the pain was getting so bad he could barely even sit or stand. So to deal with it all, his doctor just kept prescribing stronger and stronger painkillers. This quote, man, it really puts it all into perspective. He could feel himself going down a really dangerous road, becoming dependent on these opiates that were messing with his head. He knew he was right on the edge of a much, much bigger problem, the same one that millions of people struggle with. This was his rock bottom. But right when he was at his lowest point, he stumbles onto something that changes, well, everything. It was a solution he'd always dismissed, and it wasn't just going to heal him physically. It was about to totally reshape his entire future. Okay, so the big discovery was CBD oil, and it's super important we get this distinction right. You have THC, which is the stuff in cannabis that's psychoactive. It's what gets you high. But then you have CBD, which is a totally different compound. It is not psychoactive, and that difference is the key to this whole story. And the results? They were almost instant and just mind-blowing. He took a small dose of CBD oil, and his back pain just gone. But what was really shocking was that his sinus infections cleared up, and his asthma symptoms disappeared too. He got off the painkillers, he ditched his inhalers, and because he wasn't in constant pain anymore, his whole mood just lifted. You know, this whole experience just completely flipped his own ideas on their head. He used to think medical marijuana was kind of a joke, just an excuse for people to get high. But his own research and his own body were telling him something completely different. Cannabis is a seriously powerful natural anti-inflammatory. He learned that far from making you stoned and stupid, some strains are actually used by super smart, productive people in Silicon Valley for energy and focus. So what's the science behind all these different effects? It's pretty cool, actually. The cannabis plant has over 100 active chemical compounds called cannabinoids, and their effects are tweaked by these other aromatic compounds called terpenes. That's why one strain might give you a burst of energy, while another one helps you sleep. It's a lot more complex than most people think. So, he's got his health back, he's feeling great, and now he's on a mission. He literally couldn't stop researching and talking about what he discovered. And that personal passion pretty quickly turned into a real, structured, and eventually a very profitable business. So how did he actually do it? Well, it wasn't overnight. He took it step by step. First, he just started a blog to share all his research. Then he branched out to YouTube and social media. The real game changer, though, was when he learned about affiliate marketing. That's where you get a commission for recommending other people's products. So he just started talking about and linking to the CBD oils he was already using and genuinely believed in. And in the beginning, it wasn't a ton of money. A few $100 a month started trickling in. It was awesome. It was proof that the idea could work, but it definitely wasn't enough to quit his day job. But then things started to pick up. As more people found his content, that few $100 a month turned into a few $1,000 a month. Okay, so now this wasn't just a little hobby anymore. This was a serious side hustle. And then, boom, things just took off. His YouTube channel started getting really popular and his income just skyrocketed. Eventually, it hit $15,000 a month. That was the magic number, the point where his passion project was making more money than his high-paying tech job. So at that point, what do? The choice was a no-brainer. He walked away from his tech job and went all in on his passion. He said it was just unbelievable that he was getting paid to research and talk about the very thing that had literally saved his health and given him his life back. Okay, so he goes through this incredible transformation from chronic pain to financial freedom. What did he actually learn from all of it? Let's dig into his biggest takeaways about money, health, and what it really means to be happy. His first big lesson is something we've probably all heard, but it's so true. Money just makes you more of what you already are. It's an amplifier. He was crystal clear on this. No amount of cash in the bank could have fixed his degenerative disc disease. If you've got problems, money won't make them disappear. It'll probably just make them bigger. So for him, the real win, the best part about having money, it's not about buying fancy stuff. It's about freedom. It's autonomy. After being trapped for years, first by a demanding job and then by his own body, the true value of money was just the ability to control his own time, to work when he felt like it, and rest when he needed to, without anyone looking over his shoulder. Now, this is really interesting, right? For a guy who built a whole business around cannabis, his advice to young people is pretty surprising. He tells them to stay away from all of it. Drugs, alcohol, even cannabis, until their bodies are fully grown. He basically says that when you're young, you've already got the best thing going for you, youth. And there's nothing you can take that's better than that. And that really brings us to his final takeaway, the thing that this entire journey through pain and success really taught him. In the end, the biggest lesson wasn't about business or money or even medicine. It was about perspective. It's a simple but powerful reminder to just appreciate right now, to soak it all in, because when it comes down to it, that's really all that matters.
All right, so today we're going to get into the story of a self-made millionaire trader. I mean, this guy turned 50 grand into over $1.2 million. But, and this is the important part, this isn't just another story about making a ton of money. Nope, it's about a really powerful philosophy, one that was born from tragedy, and it fueled one of the most disciplined journeys you will ever hear about.
So, check this out. When he was asked about his childhood, this was his opening line. The central memory of my childhood is a tragic one. I mean, wow, that's not what you expect to hear from some high-flying trader, right? It tells you immediately that there's something much deeper going on here, something powerful running just beneath the surface of all that financial success. And yeah, it all kicks off with a really profound loss.
And that deep, powerful current, it actually has a name, memento mori. It's an old Latin phrase, and it basically means, remember you must die. Now, I know that sounds kind of dark, but for this trader, it's not a morbid thought at all. In fact, it's the ultimate motivator. It's the philosophy that let him turn this personal tragedy into just an unstoppable source of energy and focus.
So what was the tragedy that forged this whole philosophy? Well, it happened when he was just 8 years old. His older brother was killed by a drunk driver. They were just walking home from school. He says that single moment was the start of his adult view of the world. I mean, can you imagine, at 8 years old, getting this brutal early lesson in just how fragile life really is?
You know, he talks about carrying this sense of survivor's guilt, always wondering why he lived and his talented brother didn't. But here's the thing. Instead of letting that crush him, he completely flipped it. He turned that grief into pure energy. He started to see his own life as an unearned gift. And that feeling, well, it just drives him to make every single day count. No exceptions.
Okay, so with this incredible, life-altering drive, you'd think he just jumped straight into the markets, right? Wrong. Not even close. His journey to making his very first trade was an absolute masterclass in patience and discipline, and it took an entire decade.
Just look at this timeline. It shows you the sheer persistence we're talking about here. He gets the idea back in 1998, has to adjust his plan in 2003, and just keeps saving slowly for a full 10 years. And then, the timing, my gosh, the timing. The very moment he finally hits his $50,000 goal, what happens? Lehman Brothers collapses, the entire financial system is on the brink of disaster, and pure fear just kept him completely on the sidelines.
So after months of being basically paralyzed by fear, he finally made his move. And while his first jump into the market was, let's be honest, a massive success, it also led him to the single most important realization of his entire career.
So it's March 2009, the absolute bottom of the market. And he goes all in on stocks he actually knew and used. We're talking Apple, Amazon, Netflix. He was following that classic advice, right? And his timing, it was perfect. Get this, one stock he bought, Select Comfort, went from 40 cents a share to over $10 in just 1 year. He made an absolute fortune.
But here's the move that separates the pros from the amateurs. Instead of just getting greedy and riding the wave, he cashed out. He sold everything. He had the wisdom to look at his incredible gains and say, you know what? This was because of a historic bull market. It wasn't because of my repeatable skill. He knew that if he wanted to last in this game, he needed his own strategies.
And that is exactly what he did. He spent the next phase of his journey developing his own systems, and he really focused on two main strategies that became the engine that drove his portfolio into the millions.
Okay, so his main bread and butter trade, it's based on a pretty well-documented market anomaly called PAAD. Now, the core idea is actually super simple. When a company's earnings report totally surprises Wall Street, causing a big price jump or drop, that momentum often keeps going for days, sometimes even weeks. He just figured out how to ride that wave.
His process for trading this is incredibly methodical. He doesn't guess the news, he trades the reaction to the news. So, step 1, he finds a stock with that big gap up. But then, and this is the genius part, he waits. He waits a whole extra day. Why? Because it lets that initial frenzy die down, which makes the options he wants to buy way cheaper. Then he buys call options and just capitalizes on that slow, steady drift created by the big institutional guys slowly piling into the stock.
All right, his second secret is this really clever, contrarian play he calls the Death Star trade. And it's exactly what it sounds like. This happens when a tech giant, a Death Star like Amazon or Facebook, announces it's entering a new market. What happens next? The stock of the smaller company that's already in that market just gets absolutely crushed out of fear.
So the market completely panics, right? Everyone assumes the little company is just toast. But our trader, he knows the reality is way more complicated. A massive company like Amazon has a million priorities, and it takes a long time to really disrupt a niche market. So he bets against that short-term overreaction. He buys the beaten-down stock after the initial panic has died down.
And this has happened over and over again. I mean, just look at these examples. When Amazon went after Shutterfly's market, the stock got hammered, only to recover completely within 2 months. Same thing happened when Facebook went after Match Group. The stock crashed, then rallied to new all-time highs. He's literally profiting from the gap between fear and reality.
But, it's not just about the trading strategies. His success is really built on a foundation of super simple but powerful daily habits that, honestly, anyone could use to improve their focus and performance.
Okay, life hack number 1 is something so simple it's almost hidden in plain sight. Coffee. Yep, that's it. He's a total pragmatist. He just does what works. And for him, 1 or 2 cups a day gives him this massive boost to his mental sharpness and his productivity. Simple, right? But incredibly effective. Now, his second life hack is a concept he actually borrowed from studying Napoleon. It's called a swipe file. And it's not some app or digital folder. It's a real physical folder filled with papers. This file is basically his personal system for never, ever forgetting the most important lessons he's ever learned.
So what's actually in this thing? Well, pretty much anything that's made a huge impression on him. We're talking notes from every single trading book he's ever read, articles that inspire him, reminders on health and nutrition, hacks for better sleep. He even has notes on how to be more charismatic. And he reviews the whole thing at the start of every month to stay locked in on what truly matters.
And the result of this really unique combination, this powerful mindset, these disciplined strategies, these simple life hacks, what does it all add up to? A trading account now worth over $1.2 million. That number is the tangible outcome of a decade of patience and a lifetime of purpose.
This quote right here, it just perfectly captures the philosophy behind his swipe file, and really his whole approach to life. Success isn't always about chasing the next new thing. So often, it's about systematically reminding yourself of the fundamental truths you've already figured out.
So that kind of leaves us with a question for you. Think about your own goals, your own journey. If you were going to start a swipe file right this second, what is the one lesson, the one piece of wisdom that you would put in it first? What's the one thing you need to be reminded of today?
Some financial journeys, they're slow and steady, but then there are the other kind, the ones that look like a rocket launch. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. This is a story that it defies all the rules. We're talking a 6-year sprint from a totally boring office job to becoming a multi-millionaire. So you gotta ask, how on earth does something like that happen? Let's get into it.
So let's just start with the final number, $1.8 million. That's his net worth after taxes. But here's the crazy part. You have to see where he was just 6 years before this. I mean, it was a completely different universe. So you're probably thinking, what's the secret sauce here? Did he win the lottery? Get a huge inheritance? Nope, not even close. It was this wild mix of a really smart side hustle, some pretty extreme personal sacrifice, and then one massive all-in bet that changed his entire life. All right, let's go back to the very beginning. All right, so every story's got a starting point, right? And to really get how this thing took off, we've got to go back to the launch pad. For our guy, that launch pad was, well, it was a place a lot of us know. A stable, but totally soul-crushing office job. So picture this. It's 2013. He's an accountant. He literally described his own job as boring, but pretty easy. And he was pulling in about 60 grand a year. I mean, that's a starting point it's super relatable, right? So many people are right there. And when you look at the timeline here, wow, it really shows you just how fast this all happened. From that boring desk job in 2013 to becoming a millionaire by 2019, that is an absolutely insane timeline. So let's dig into how he pulled it off, starting with that very first spark. So that first big move, it wasn't some complicated master plan, nah. It started way smaller.
It started with a book, an idea, and just deciding to, do something. This was the little spark that basically lit the fuse on the whole thing. Okay, so check this out. You can really see how it all snowballed. First, he reads that famous book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, and that gets the gears turning. Then he happens to find this Build a Business contest by Shopify, and he's just like, hey, why not? And his idea? Super simple. He's going to sell vintage collectibles that he finds at local garage sales. I mean, it's low cost, it's simple, and honestly, it's kind of brilliant. And this right here, this was his secret weapon. He just got that people will pay big money for a little piece of their own past. Nostalgia. So he's out there buying stuff that nobody else wants, like old Polaroid cameras, vintage t-shirts, records. He cleans them up, and boom, his profit margins were just huge. I mean, his cost to get the inventory was next to nothing. Okay, so having a good idea is one thing, but actually funding it and making it grow, that's a whole other ballgame. And this next part of the story, this is where the real grind comes in. It required a level of sacrifice that, let's be honest, most people just aren't willing to make. Get ready for this number, 70%. That's not a typo. He managed to save 70% of his take-home pay and pour it right back into his business. Just think about that. More than 2/3 of every single paycheck was going straight into his side hustle, not into, living. So how in the world do you save 70% of your income? Well, you make some pretty insane changes. He sold his car, he moved out of his own place and into a tiny room in someone else's house. He completely canceled his cell phone and his cable, stopped eating out entirely. I mean, it was definitely not glamorous, but that's what gave him the cash he needed to buy more inventory and really scale things up. All right, so as his store is getting bigger and bigger, he starts to notice something. He has this unique insight that almost nobody else has. See, he wasn't just selling on Shopify, he was a true power user of the platform. He knew it inside and out, and that perspective, that led him to make the single biggest decision of his life, a huge all-in bet. So in 2015, Shopify goes public, has its IPO, and for him, this was it. This was his moment. Because he was using the product every single day, he could see its potential in a way that some analyst on Wall Street just couldn't. So he makes this massive move. He starts selling off his store's inventory and starts funneling every last penny, from his business profits, from his accounting salary, all of it, straight into Shopify stock. And this quote from Andrew Carnegie, this basically became his mantra. He totally threw the whole idea of diversification out the window. That thing everyone tells you to do? He was convinced that you don't build life-changing wealth by spreading your money around. You build it by putting all your eggs in one basket, like the quote says, and then watching that basket like a hawk. And just to be super clear here, this is the exact opposite of what any financial advisor would ever tell you to do, right? Traditional investing is all about diversification, spreading out the risk, slow and steady wins the race. His strategy, it was all about concentrating all of that risk into one single bet, for the chance at explosive, world-changing growth. So for the next few years, that's exactly what he did. He watched that basket. He kept buying more stock. And then, in 2019, that massive high-stakes bet paid off. And I mean, it really paid off. So here's how the endgame played out. Early in 2019, he spots a major technical breakout pattern in the stock chart. To really juice his returns, he starts using options. Now, options are basically a high-risk, high-reward way to leverage your bet. Think of it like controlling a huge amount of stock for a small down payment. But maybe the most important part? He knew when to get out. He sold most of his position near the top in July of that year. And the final result of that whole 6-year grind, after Uncle Sam took his cut, his net worth was sitting at just over $1.8 million. I mean, think about that. From $60,000 a year to that kind of money in only 6 years. It's incredible. So after he cashed out, his whole strategy did a complete 180. The all-in on one thing approach was over. He switched from trying to create wealth to trying to preserve it. And you can see it right here in his new portfolio. A big chunk is in safer stuff like real estate and savings. He's got some Bitcoin, some gold, and of course, he's still holding a piece of Shopify. You got to hold on to the stock that changed your life, right? So what's the next chapter for him? Well, he quit that boring accounting job for sure. And now he's focusing all his energy on Bitcoin and the crypto space. His whole story is just this amazing testament to what can happen with a unique insight, a ton of sacrifice, and a huge appetite for risk. But it does leave you with this one really interesting question, right? After you've already hit a grand slam, what do you do for an encore? Today, we're diving into a story that sounds almost too good to be true. It's about a guy who went from waiting tables, living on basically just vegetable stew, to building $1 million portfolio. But this isn't some story about getting lucky. It's a masterclass in hustle, sacrifice, and pure focus. Let's break down exactly how he did it.
Seriously, how is that even possible? It sounds like some kind of fantasy, but this story is anything but. It's a real, step-by-step journey, and we're going to walk through exactly how he pulled it off. You know, for any huge life change, you need a powerful why, a real reason to push through the hard stuff. And for the guy in our story today, that why was forged in a childhood he was absolutely determined to leave behind. He grew up in Fresno, California, and it wasn't an easy childhood. He watched his dad struggle after a business went under. The family was constantly moving from apartment to apartment, always stressed about rent. That kind of instability, well, it leaves a mark on you. And that right there, that one promise to himself, that became the emotional fuel for everything he did next. This wasn't just some vague dream of being rich. It was this deep, burning need to build a life with stability, with control. That was his mission. So one day, he's working as a waiter in Pasadena, driving through these incredibly wealthy neighborhoods and just wondering, how? How is this life even possible? That curiosity led him to the library, where he picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that book, it was like a light bulb went off. He suddenly understood that building wealth wasn't just about earning more money. It was about making your money work for you. He finally had a roadmap. So with this new plan in his head, he didn't wait, he didn't ease into it. He took massive, drastic, immediate action to completely change his financial life. This is where the real grit comes in. The very first thing on the chopping block, his single biggest expense, rent. He gave up his comfortable apartment and moved into one single rented room. Tough move, but absolutely crucial for freeing up cash, and fast. Next up, food. He went full-on extreme. No more eating out, period. His entire diet became ruthlessly simple. Huge pots of homemade vegetable stew and rice for every single meal. Think about the money that saves. And yep, you guessed it, everything else got cut too. New clothes, gadgets, going out, all of it gone. His entire wardrobe came exclusively from Goodwill and other thrift shops. So, what was the result of all this crazy sacrifice? Get this, he was saving 50% of his paycheck every single month. A 50% savings rate is just wild. It put him on the fast track, but he knew to go even faster, saving wasn't enough. He had to earn more. Right. Saving was only half the equation. The other half was earning. And he didn't just get a second job. He took this to a whole new level, juggling 3 jobs at the same time. This was his life. He had his full-time gig waiting tables. Then he'd drive for Uber back in the early days when it was super profitable. And then, this is the wild card, he had a side gig as a singer on Fiverr. And you will not believe which hustle paid off the most. That Fiverr gig, where he'd sing happy birthday for $5 or $10 a pop, started bringing in an extra $150 a day. A day. That's over 50 grand a year just from singing. Incredible. Of course, a hustle this relentless has a price. And for him, that price was sleep. During this whole time, he was operating on just 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night. Every other waking moment was spent working one of those 3 jobs. So you've got to ask, how did he not just completely burn out? He said that even though he was exhausted, he also had more energy than ever. Knowing he was on the right path with that clear goal in mind gave him what he called a secret source of energy. His purpose was simply stronger than his exhaustion. Okay, so he's saving like crazy, he's earning from 3 different jobs, but all that cash was feeding into a really simple, really powerful plan. Let's look at the formula he used to turn all that hustle into actual wealth. And this is it. This is the whole playbook right here. It's so simple, we've seen him master step 1, earning as much as possible. And we've seen him master step 2, spending as little as possible. But step 3, investing the difference, that's where the magic really happens. So where did all that money go? Well, taking his cues from TV's Jim Cramer, he poured every last dollar into what he saw as the most dominant companies of our time, the FAANG stocks. We're talking Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. This wasn't just random stock picking, it was a super focused bet on the future. He saw these companies were changing everything, and his whole strategy was to buy, keep buying, and this is key, never sell.
So after years of this grind, years of vegetable stew, of sleepless nights, and disciplined investing, the payoff arrived. This is the moment the whole journey was building toward. And the result? His brokerage account ticked over to just over $1 million. All of it from those FAANG stocks he had been systematically buying and holding onto for dear life. He had actually done it. I mean, just look at the transformation. It's staggering. He went from being a waiter living in a tiny room to a homeowner and a business owner, building a life with his wife. The days of sacrificing alone were officially over. Today, he doesn't wait tables or drive for Uber. He and his wife started their own business, a property management company that's capital light, which means they didn't have to sell a single share of their stock to get it started. It creates a whole new income stream while their main wealth just keeps on growing. And this is his final message, and it's a really powerful one. He truly believes his journey wasn't about some special genius or a lucky break. It was about sacrifice, hustle, and a clear plan. He's living proof that a few years of intense focus can completely rewrite your future. And that's his story. It is such a powerful example of what is possible when you have that intense motivation and a simple plan. It really leaves us with a big question to think about. What's the first small step, a tiny sacrifice or a new side hustle that you could take to start changing your own story?
All right, today we're going to unpack a real head-scratcher. It's the story of a small-town musician who, against all odds, became a millionaire, and we're going to figure out exactly how he did it. I mean, really think about that for a second. A small-town guy plays folk music and has a 7-figure net worth? Those two things just don't seem to go together. So, what's the secret?
So, let's meet the man himself. In his own words, you can tell he's just deeply connected to his home. He's not some city slicker. He lives in the house his grandfather built, sells real estate during the day, and plays bluegrass music at night. We're talking seriously humble roots here.
Okay, so the first and most obvious place to look for all this wealth has to be his day job, right? Real estate. And it turns out he's not just any agent. He pretty much has a monopoly in his town. Let's see how that adds up.
You know, you always hear about that big 6% real estate commission, and you think, wow, that's a ton of money. But hold on, it's not that simple. See, that 6% gets split right down the middle between the seller's agent and the buyer's agent, and then each of them has to give half of their cut to their broker. So at the end of the day, the agent's actual take-home pay is only about 1.5% of the house's sale price.
So what does that 1.5% look like in cold, hard cash? Well, on a typical house in his area, he might make $1,500, maybe $4,500. Now, if he gets lucky and represents both the buyer and the seller, he can double that. Don't get me wrong, that's a good living, a really good living. But is it millionaire money? The math says probably not.
And here's his huge advantage, his secret weapon. He's a local legend. He's lived there forever, he knows everybody, and everybody trusts him. So when it's time to buy or sell a house, he is the guy. But even with business constantly coming his way, building $1 million fortune at a few grand a pop, well, that would take a very long time. Something else has to be going on here. So if the real estate money isn't the whole story, let's check out his other gig, the music. Maybe he's some kind of secret bluegrass superstar raking in the cash? Well, he actually answers that question with a joke. He asks this to explain what it's really like to be a professional musician, financially speaking. I'll give you a second. Think you got it? And there it is. That's the punchline. You know, it's a funny joke, but it makes a really serious point. His music, it's his passion, it's his lifeblood, but it is absolutely not his paycheck. He is not getting rich playing gigs. And this really gets to the core of his worldview. He has this philosophy that if something is actually fun, it probably doesn't pay that well. You know, jobs like being a lawyer or a tax accountant pay a lot because, let's be honest, not a lot of people are lining up to do that stuff for free. But music? People will happily play music for a hot meal. So yeah, we can safely cross music career off the list as the source of his wealth. The plot thickens,
And this, my friends, is where the story takes a completely unexpected turn. Turns out, the answer to this whole puzzle wasn't in his job. It was in his hobby.
We've been looking in all the wrong places. That steady income from real estate, that was just the seed money. The real wealth grew out of his love for bluegrass music itself, just not in the way any of us would have guessed.
And there you have it, straight from him. For 40 years, every time he had a little extra cash from selling a house, he didn't put it in the stock market. He put it into high-quality, beautiful instruments. It wasn't some grand investment scheme. It was just a slow, steady accumulation driven by his genuine love for the music.
Now, just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about here, get this. He owns several incredibly rare lower mandolins. Just one of them is worth over $150,000. That is just staggering for a single instrument.
So you add up all those pre-war Martin guitars, all the rare mandolins, and the total estimated value of his collection comes to $1.5 million. Mystery solved? His passion project, the thing he did for love, quietly out-earned his day job many, many times over.
So you're probably asking, why on earth are they worth so much? I mean, they're just wooden strings, right? Well, no. These aren't just any old guitars. They were built before the war, during the Great Depression, by the absolute best craftsmen Martin had. And they were made from materials like Brazilian rosewood, which is now endangered and basically irreplaceable. You literally cannot make these instruments today.
So this story isn't just about getting lucky. It's actually a masterclass in a really simple but incredibly powerful investment philosophy. Let's break down a secret. First up is what we'll call the principle of scarcity. His big advice is to collect things that have a finite supply. They're not making any more pre-war Martin guitars, period. And when the supply is fixed, but more and more people want them, well, basic economics says the value is probably going to go up.
But scarcity by itself isn't enough. And this next part is absolutely crucial. We'll call it the principle of expertise. He invested in guitars because he knows guitars. He lives and breathes them. That deep personal knowledge meant no one could ever pull a fast one on him. As he says himself, if he had tried to collect something he didn't understand, like rare coins, he probably would have gotten fleeced. The lesson is simple. Invest in what you know.
You know, when you really get down to it, this isn't just a story about money. The financial success is almost like a happy accident, a byproduct of a much bigger life philosophy.
And this is his parting advice for all of us. He didn't chase wealth by collecting instruments, he chased his passion. He spent his life building something rich with music and community and friendship, and the wealth, it just kind of followed. His story is just this powerful reminder to invest your time in the things that you genuinely love.
And that leaves us with one last thought. The big takeaway here isn't that you should run out and start buying vintage guitars. It's to look at your own life, your own hobbies, your own interests, and ask yourself this question. What hidden value, whether it's financial or personal or something else entirely, is just waiting to be discovered inside the things you already love to do?
So let me ask you something. What would you do if you had millions of dollars, but you chose to own almost nothing? It sounds like a paradox, right? Well, that's exactly the story we're getting into today, the $5 million digital monk. And this quote, I mean, this just says it all. A net worth of over $5 million bucks, and yet everything he owns in the entire world, we're talking a toothbrush, an iPhone, a laptop, a few clothes, it all fits in a single backpack. So you got to ask two things right away. One, how on earth did he pull that off? And two, maybe the bigger question, why would he want to live like that? For starters, the guy has no permanent address. He spends most of his time, about 60% of it, living on cruise ships. Yeah, cruise ships. The other 40%, he's hopping between Airbnbs all around the globe. He calls it the digital monk lifestyle. But to really get why he does this, we have to rewind the clock, way back to a time before any of this was even a dream. Because his journey to this, incredible level of freedom, it didn't start from a place of wealth or privilege. Nope. It started from the absolute opposite. This right here, man, it just paints such a stark picture. Before he hit it big, he was forced to move back into his childhood bedroom. He'd actually run out of money to finish his economics degree. He was swimming in credit card debt and just bouncing between these unfulfilling, dead-end jobs. He even said he felt like an intellectual explorer by night, but a total loser by day. I mean, by his own admission, it was a really, really humiliating time. And it was from this absolute low point that something truly bizarre happened. a single night that would completely change the entire course of his life. Okay, so picture this. It's his 5-year high school reunion. But he wasn't inside, mingling and making small talk. He felt like such a failure that he couldn't even bring himself to go. Instead, he just went out drinking with some friends and, in his own words, got drunk, stoned, and thoroughly numbed. So he stumbles home later that night, sits down at his computer, and then something just clicks. He describes this really strange, almost out-of-body experience. It was like he was floating above himself, watching himself browse Reddit, but with this weird sense of purpose. He felt like he knew exactly where he was going online, even though he had no clue where he was going in life. And in that weird, altered state, he finds a discussion about Bitcoin. Now, you have to remember, this is way back in early 2011. Bitcoin was this super obscure, nerdy thing. But to his mind in that moment, the whole idea, this new form of money, totally outside of government control with a fixed supply, it just made perfect, crystal clear sense. He knew, right then and there, he had to get some. And this is the crucial part. This wasn't just some weird night he chalked up to being stoned and forgot about. He actually acted on it. He turned that mystical vision into a very real, all-or-nothing bet. So how much did he bet? Everything. I mean, literally every single dollar he had to his name. $900, he took it all and bought 900 Bitcoins, which were trading for about $1 a pop back then. That was his entire net worth. And the results of that $900 bet? Well, this. At their peak, those 900 Bitcoins were worth $5.6 million, a truly life-changing amount of money. But think about it. The ride to get there was insane, with wild price swings. Most people would have cashed out. So why didn't he? Well, he had 2 reasons. One logical and one not so logical. The intellectual reason was that he saw Bitcoin as this binary bet. It was either going to zero or it was going to be worth a fortune. So selling somewhere in the middle just didn't make sense. But the spiritual reason was just as strong. That memory of his vision, that strange out-of-body experience, was so vivid that he just knew deep down he was supposed to hold on for the long haul. But all this incredible wealth didn't lead to mansions and sports cars. Not at all. Instead, it led him to develop this really unique philosophy of freedom, which was all about freedom from things. See, he believes that way too often our possessions end up owning us. By not having a house and a bunch of stuff, he frees up what he calls his mental RAM. He's not worrying about a leaky roof or peeling paint. And all the constant travel, that forces his brain to break out of old ruts and create new patterns, which he says keeps him sharp and curious. And if you think this nomadic lifestyle sounds crazy expensive, get this. It's actually shockingly practical. He's found cruises for as little as $35 a day. $35, and that includes his room, all his meals, and entertainment. That's often way cheaper than living on land, and it lets his wealth just keep growing while he sees the world. This quote right here really is the heart of it all. For him, travel isn't just a vacation, it's a way of life. It's a tool that forces his brain into new patterns, keeping him in this constant state of fresh perspectives, always growing and curious. So it all leaves us with this really fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? His story completely challenges the normal idea of what you're supposed to do with money. For him, true freedom wasn't about buying more things. It was about buying the freedom from things. And it really makes you wonder, what does true freedom look like to you?
Hey everyone, today we're going to dive into the incredible story of how a forgotten family craft, something that started in a kitchen, blew up into $1 million online business. It's an amazing story about passion, making a few really smart choices, and honestly, the power of just getting started.
Yeah, you heard that right. Over $1 million from selling homemade candles. So the big question is, how? How on earth do you go from a simple hobby to that kind of insane success? Well, that's exactly what we're about to break down.
All right, so let's get into how this whole thing began, because this story, it doesn't start in some business school or with a fancy investor pitch. Nope, it starts somewhere a lot quieter, on a small family farm.
So picture this. She grew up in a really traditional home in eastern Washington. Her dad was a farmer, her mom was a farmer's wife, and summers were all about canning vegetables and making jams. But her mom also had this amazing skill. She was a master candle maker, a craft passed down from her own mother in Norway. And while she'd help out, back then, it just felt like a chore. It wasn't anything special to her.
So you know how it goes. Life happens. Years just flew by. She went off to college, she got married, she started her own family, and all those days of melting wax and setting wicks, they just became a really distant memory, totally buried for years.
And then, this happens. One simple little moment. She's watching TV late one night, a show about candle making comes on, and suddenly, boom, all those childhood memories come flooding back. It's kind of crazy, right? This one tiny, random event is what kicked this entire million-dollar journey into gear.
But here's where things get really interesting. This wasn't just about her wanting to remake her mom's old candles. This was about taking that traditional family craft and making it way better, making it different. This is where a fun hobby starts to look like a real business idea.
And this right here, this was her secret sauce. It was a simple change, but it made all the difference. You see, most candles you buy in a store are made from paraffin wax, which is basically a petroleum product. It can release some pretty nasty stuff into the air. She decided, nope, I'm going to use soy or beeswax instead. They're renewable and they burn clean. And instead of those super artificial scents, she used natural essential oils.
And get this, the best part is, this whole unique selling proposition didn't come from some fancy market research. It came from a really personal place. She just wanted to create a better, more natural product that she'd actually feel good about using in her own home around her own kids.
Okay, so she's got this amazing all-natural product. But a great product that's just sitting in your kitchen, well, that's not a business. The next step was absolutely crucial. How do you actually start selling the thing?
She did it in the smartest way possible. She started really small, just testing the waters. First, she made some for herself. Then she started giving them away as gifts for birthdays or dinner parties. And the feedback, it was immediate. And everyone said the same thing. Oh my gosh, you should totally sell these. Now, the idea of opening a physical shop, with rent and all that risk, that was a complete non-starter for her. But then a friend made a super simple suggestion that changed everything. Why don't you just try selling them on Etsy? It was the perfect low-risk way to just see what happens. And you could just feel the excitement in this quote, right? She puts a couple of candles up on the site, not expecting much, and bam, they sell almost instantly. That first sale to a total stranger, that's an incredible feeling. That's the moment the light bulb really goes off and a hobby becomes a real deal business. All right, so those first few sales are in the bag. Awesome. But how do you go from that initial little spark to a full-blown wildfire? Let's look at how she scaled this whole thing up from a few online sales into a major operation, because that's a huge leap. And you can really see the journey play out here. It starts with that first sale on Etsy back in early 2014, but she didn't just stay there, which is key. As the business kept growing, she leveled up. She built her own professional Shopify website to really create her own brand. And crucially, she learned how to drive her own customers there using social media like Facebook and Instagram. And I love this slide because it shows the real physical journey. I mean, it starts in the kitchen, then you've got the Etsy shop, then the Shopify site, which makes it feel legit. But pretty soon, your whole living room is just filled with boxes, and you have to lease a small warehouse. And that leads to the biggest step of all, hiring people, because you just can't do it all yourself anymore. It's the classic kitchen table to company store.
So after all this incredible success, building this whole thing from scratch, what's her core advice? For anyone out there who has a hobby or an idea they've been sitting on, you're going to want to lean in for this part.
It's really this simple. Her number one piece of advice isn't about some complicated marketing strategy or business plan. It's just those 3 words. Just get started. It sounds so obvious, right? But it's the one thing that stops almost everyone.
And to be clear, getting started doesn't mean you go register a business name and spend weeks designing a perfect logo. No, it means focus on what actually matters first. Make something and see if anyone will actually pay you money for it. That's it. Product validation is step 1, 2, and 3.
I mean, let this one sink in for a second, because this quote is everything. The fear of making a mistake, of not being perfect, is what paralyzes most people. But the truth is, the biggest failure of all is just never even trying. Not starting is the only way to guarantee you'll fail. So, to wrap it all up, here are the big takeaways. First, make something and try to sell it, like right away. That's how you get real feedback and figure out what people actually want. And when you're online, just be yourself. Don't try to sound like some big, boring corporation. So many people are looking for that authentic, homemade feel.
And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? This whole incredible journey started with a forgotten craft, a hobby that was sparked back to life by a random TV show. So it really makes you think, what's your candle? What's that forgotten skill or quiet passion you have that's just sitting there, waiting for you to get started?
It's the kind of story we all dream about, right? Taking something you love to do, a simple passion, and turning it into an honest-to-goodness fortune. Well, today, we're going to break down the incredible story of an artist who did exactly that. She transformed her love for drawing into a surprisingly simple million-dollar business. Let's get into it. So, how did she actually do it? Look, it wasn't just about being a talented artist. It was about having a sharp eye for a brand new opportunity. And this one, just brilliant idea that completely flipped the way freelance work is usually done. All right, so let's rewind. Every story like this has a beginning. And for our artist, it all started with a passion for drawing that was, well, lifelong. This wasn't some casual hobby she picked up. This was baked into her identity from day one. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing to say about yourself. She says she was one of those kids who was always drawing. You know the type, doodling on everything, even on the walls of her house as a toddler. For her, this wasn't really a career choice. It just felt like what she was born to do. So she took all that raw talent and actually channeled it. She went to a great art school, got serious about graphic design, and really mastered the tools of the trade like Adobe Photoshop. And this is the key moment where that childhood passion starts looking like a real marketable skill. Okay, so after art school, she steps out into the professional world. But right as she's starting her career, there's this huge shift happening in the market. And the thing is, she spotted it way before most people did, and it completely changed her trajectory.
Her first job was pretty standard stuff for a graphic designer back then. She was at an agency, making websites, designing book covers for the big traditional publishing houses. But while she was deep in that world, this quiet little digital revolution was starting to bubble up.
And this is where things get really interesting. So at the same time she's working her 9-to-5 in the old school publishing world, she goes out and buys one of the first Amazon Kindles. This gave her this perfect, unique viewpoint, right? She's a designer by day and an eBook reader by night. This lets her see firsthand the absolute explosion of self-published authors on Amazon and, crucially, the insane demand for covers that came with it. And that's when the light bulb went off. She's looking at her paycheck from the agency, which she says wasn't all that great. Then she's looking at what people are willing to pay for these Kindle covers online, and there's this massive gap. The opportunity was just staring her right in the face. So what does she do? She decides to go for it and start freelancing. But, and this is important, it was not an overnight success story, not even close. The road to $1 million started with a serious grind, hustling for just a few dollars at a time.
Get this, her very first freelance jobs, coming from places like Fiverr, were paying her $5, maybe $10 for a custom-made book cover. I mean, for a professionally trained designer, it's basically nothing, but that's where she started.
And the worst part? For that measly $5 or $10, the process was an absolute nightmare. The client fills out a form, she comes up with ideas, they want changes, she makes more designs, they want more revisions. It was this endless, frustrating cycle. A mountain of work for like a handful of coins.
But you know what? It was that exact frustration, that grind, that led directly to her big breakthrough. It was a single aha moment that was about to solve all of her problems and really build the foundation for everything that came next.
And here's the best part. The idea didn't hit her when she was hunched over her computer, all stressed out. Nope, it came to her when she was out for a jog, just clearing her head. And that was the moment that changed her entire life. It all came down to this one simple but totally brilliant question. Why am I doing all this custom work? Why don't I just post all of my best ideas online and sell them as they are? No clients, no revisions. Just, here's the art, buy it if you like it.
And she didn't just sit on that idea. She acted on it, like immediately. She created a business model that was so simple, it was just genius. Let's break down exactly how she built it.
I mean, look at how straightforward this is. We're not talking about some huge, complex tech startup here. She just bought a domain name, got some cheap hosting, threw up a basic WordPress site, and started uploading her designs. That's it. That was the whole business.
So she sets this all up, and just a few months later, cha-ching, her first sale comes in. And the price? $50. That's 10 times what she was making on Fiverr for way, way less work. Right away, you could see this thing was gonna work. I mean, just look at this comparison. The old way was custom work, endless back and forth, low pay, and tons of time. The new way? Pre-made designs, what you see is what you get, higher prices, and almost no time investment per sale. She went from selling her time to selling a product, a digital product she could sell again and again and again. And this simple model didn't just make her a little side hustle money. Oh no, it scaled. It scaled big time, leading to this massive financial payoff. And you know what? Her plan for what to do with all that money was just as brilliantly simple. Pretty soon, her business was humming. She was selling around 10 covers every single day. That's anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a day. And think about it, her only real cost was her website hosting fee. So almost all of that was pure profit. And when you have that kind of money coming in every day, it adds up fast. Here's the headline number. In just 6 years, she made over $1 million after taxes from that simple little website selling her drawings. That is just incredible. So what do you do with $1 million? Again, she kept it simple, no fancy financial advisors or risky crypto bets. She just put it all into a simple low-cost index fund, VTSAX. Basically, it lets you own a tiny slice of the entire US stock market. It's the classic set it and forget it strategy, and it's super effective. So after hearing this whole incredible journey, what's the big takeaway? What's the one thing we should all learn from this? Well, the artist herself boils it all down to one single powerful piece of advice. She says her success came down to one huge thing. It's so much better to have the tailwind of growth at your back. She wasn't fighting an uphill battle in a dying industry. She saw that the eBook world was exploding, and she just put her little business right in the path of that growth. It's like putting up a sail in a hurricane. And that really leaves us with a big question to think about, right? What's the growing tailwind in your world, and what can you do to position yourself to catch it?
You know, what if that empty room in your apartment wasn't just an expense? What if it was actually a secret gold mine? Well, we're about to dive into the story of how one person accidentally stumbled upon this idea and turned a single vacant bedroom into a massive business. And believe it or not, it all started with something super relatable, a roommate just moving out.
I mean, look at this question. Could an empty room change your life? It sounds kind of dramatic, doesn't it? But for the person in our story, the answer was a resounding yes. It literally led to a 6-figure rental empire. The entire journey, the whole business, it all kicks off from this one simple thought. So yeah, let's get into it and see exactly how this played out.
All right, so our first chapter, the accidental landlord. And that's really the perfect way to describe it. This whole thing started completely by accident. I mean, there was no big business plan, no investors, nothing like that. It was just a regular, everyday problem that, needed a solution.
Okay, so here's the setup. Picture this, your roommate moves out. Suddenly, you've got this empty bedroom, and you've got to cover their part of the rent, right? Now, the obvious move, the thing most of us would do, is just find another long-term roommate. But instead of going down that road, a totally different idea popped up. Hey, what if I just listed it on Airbnb for short-term stays instead? Now, just in case anyone isn't totally familiar, let's quickly break down what Airbnb is. Think of it like this. It's a platform that basically lets you run your own tiny hotel. You can list a spare room or your whole house, and people can book it by the night. The best part? Airbnb handles all the annoying stuff, the bookings, the payments, even checking out the guests, and they just take a small 3% cut. It was this super simple tool that really unlocked this entire opportunity we're talking about.
Okay, and this is where things get really interesting. The arbitrage math. This is the part where a simple fix for paying rent turns into a huge aha moment. It stopped being about just breaking even and started being about seeing this massive gap. A gap between what you could get for long-term rent versus short-term. That's arbitrage.
And here it is, the core of the whole idea, laid out plain and simple. The old roommate, they paid a flat $1,000 a month. That's it. But a quick look on Airbnb showed similar rooms in the area were going for $60 a night. All of a sudden, the light bulb goes on. The potential to make way, way more money was just staring right back from the screen. So let's actually break down the numbers because this is where it gets good.
So, at 60 bucks a night, and let's say you're booked up a pretty solid 85% of the time, which is totally doable, that one room is bringing in $1,530 a month. Now you take out Airbnb's small fee, that's about 46 bucks. Then you pay the $1,000 for that room's share of the rent. And what's left over? A pure profit of $484. And get this, the guests paid the cleaning fee, so this was almost totally passive income.
Okay, so you've got one room making you almost 500 bucks a month in profit. The next thought is pretty obvious, right? Why on earth would you stop at just one? But trying to scale this thing up, well, that's when the single biggest roadblock in this whole story appeared. The big idea was super simple. Rent entire houses, not just rooms, and list them all on Airbnb. You could multiply that profit easily. But there was one massive problem. You have to get the landlord, the actual owner, to say yes. And let's be honest, most landlords are not going to be thrilled when you say, hey, I'd like to rent your house so I can then rent it out to a different stranger every single night. Yeah, that's a tough sell.
And at first, that's exactly what happened. The answer from landlords was a big, fat no, over and over again. But instead of just giving up, a whole new strategy was born. A pitch so good, so compelling, that it turned those skeptical landlords into actual partners. This right here, this is the secret sauce that let the whole business blow up.
So what was this magic pitch? It was basically a masterclass in getting ahead of every single worry a landlord could possibly have. First up, offer more rent. Straight up, pay an extra $100 a month over what they're asking. Money talks. Second, promise the absolute ideal tenants. Guarantee no smokers and no pets ever. Third, promise to keep the place spotless, with professional cleanings literally every day or two. And finally, the clincher. Offer to take out an extra insurance policy, just for their peace of mind. I mean, you put all that together, and it's an offer that's pretty hard to say no to.
So with this killer pitch in hand, the business just exploded. Landlords started saying yes. But, of course, growth creates new problems. The big one was, how do I manage a bunch of different properties without working myself to death 24/7? And the answer, my friends, was some really smart automation.
And the results? Oh, they were good. The strategy worked like a charm. The portfolio grew to 5 whole houses. Each one was netting around $870 a month in profit. So you go from that one little room making about $484, and suddenly you're looking at a total monthly profit of over $4,350. That is a serious jump.
And this is what it's all about. This is the payoff for all that clever strategy and hard work. It went from being a cool side hustle to a full-time, honest-to-God, life-changing income. This is what financial freedom actually looks like.
So how is all this growth managed? It came down to a few key automations, and they're actually pretty simple. First, electronic smart locks. That means no more fumbling with keys or coordinating meetups. Guests get a code, and that's it. Second, the cleaning fees were just rolled into the guest's payment on Airbnb, so that was all handled. And when you put those two things together, it meant you literally never had to meet a guest in person. The whole system became incredibly hands-off.
So, when you have a system that's this profitable and this efficient, you start thinking bigger. I mean, the sky's the limit, right? So the next phase of the plan is, well, it's pretty ambitious. We're talking about a 10-fold increase in the whole operation.
Yep, 50 houses. That's the goal. And if the math holds up from the first 5, well, that translates to a potential profit of over $43,500 every single month. The logic is just so simple. If the system works for 5, why in the world can't it work for 50?
But of course, 50 houses means a ton of guests, a lot more communication. So the final piece of the puzzle to make this whole thing truly passive, even at that huge scale, is handling all that guest communication. You know, all the questions about how does the TV work? Or what's the Wi-Fi password? The solution? Just hire a 24/7 online service to be a virtual front desk for every single property.
When you step back and look at it, this entire incredible business was built just by spotting one simple gap, a difference in value between two things. So it kind of makes you think, right? The real question is, what kind of arbitrage opportunities, what little gaps, are hiding in plain sight in your world, just waiting for you to find them?
All right, we've made it to the final chapter, and honestly, this might be the most important one of all. It's called From Small Beginnings to Great Wealth. This is where everything we've talked about really comes together.
So let's dive right in.
So if you've been with us on this journey, you've taken in a ton of information, right? All the strategies, the mindsets of people who've built their own wealth. You've learned the lessons, and that is a huge first step.
But, that brings up a really big question. After all that, after all the interviews and all the tactics, what's the single most important lesson? What's the one thing that separates just knowing this stuff from actually getting results? And that question is exactly what this section is all about. Is getting all this knowledge the end of the road? Or is it really just the beginning? Because this isn't just about finishing an explainer. It's about starting something that could completely change your life.
And here's the thing, the real kicker. The author's true goal was never for you to just sit back and learn. The whole point is for you to act on what you've learned. See, knowledge, that's just potential. Action is where the real power is.
So what are we really talking about when we say action? Well, think of it as the bridge that connects the world of ideas to the real world. It's the process of actually doing something to get to where you want to go. It sounds so simple, right? But it's the one step that most people just never, ever take. Because failing to build that bridge, failing to take action, well, that has a serious cost. And this leads us to a really powerful idea from the source material: the danger of doing nothing.
The source material puts it so bluntly, it's a real wake-up call. It says, if you keep doing what you have always been doing, you'll probably be in the same place 5 years from now. Just let that sink in for a second. The same job, the same money situation, the same goals you haven't quite reached.
The author's message here is crystal clear. It's not just some casual advice, it's a plea. Don't let that happen to you. Don't let doing nothing decide the next 5 years of your life.
Okay, so that's the warning, but what's the actual fix? This is where things get really practical. The source material lays out what it calls your first millionaire moves. It doesn't just point out the problem. It gives you a clear, step-by-step way to start moving forward.
And the big idea here is that building wealth isn't about some giant, heroic leap. No, it's all about small, solid steps that you take over and over again. It's not about winning the lottery. It's about building momentum one day at a time until you're unstoppable.
So what are these first moves? The author keeps it super simple, breaking it down into a 3-part plan. First, you get control of your money by adjusting your budget. Second, you put that money to work for you by starting to invest. And third, you build a new stream of potential income by creating something new. It's a really practical roadmap to change your whole financial future. And here's what that actually looks like in the real world. Adjusting your budget just means spend a little less and save a bit more. That's it. Starting to invest sounds intimidating, but it can be as simple as opening a brokerage account and buying some stocks. Maybe a low-cost index fund. And creating something new? Hey, start that YouTube channel you've been thinking about, or maybe a blog. These are all small, deliberate actions that can completely change your financial story.
All of these lessons, all of these small actions, they all boil down to one incredibly powerful question that really frames your entire future. The source calls it the 5-year question. After hearing that stark warning from before, this question, it just hits different, doesn't it? Where will you be in 5 years? Suddenly, it's not just some daydream. It's a choice. And the answer to that question is being decided by what you do or don't do starting right now. Which leaves us right here with this one final powerful thought. Forget about next month. Forget about next week. The only question that really matters is this one. What will you do differently starting today? Because the power to change your next 5 years isn't in what you've just learned. It's in the very next small thing you decide to do.